Move, my daughter needs this seat now. The entitled mother's voice carried across the first-class cabin, sharp and demanding, making heads turn from every direction. Behind her, a teenage girl stood frozen, face flushed with embarrassment, quietly pleading, "Mom, please, there's literally a seat right there." But Diane Harrison wasn't interested in other seats. She wanted that specific seat, the window seat currently occupied by a black boy who hadn't even looked up yet from his well-worn paperback. Her Louis Vuitton Capucin's handbag, $7,800 retail, dangled from her wrist as she pointed at the boy with perfectly manicured nails that cost more than his entire outfit. What this entitled mom didn't know would make her regret every single word she said. Marcus Wilson, 11 years old and traveling alone for the first time, felt a shadow fall across his book. He looked up to find a middle-aged white woman staring down at him with the kind of expression he recognized immediately, the look adults get when they think a child doesn't belong somewhere. "Excuse me," Marcus asked politely, closing his book and sitting up straighter in his first-class seat, the seat that had cost him 20 months of saved allowance, birthday money, and earnings from his small greeting card business. "This seat," Diane said, gesturing as if explaining something to a toddler, "is obviously meant for my daughter Olivia. She needs the window for her anxiety, and I'm sure there's been some mix-up with your seating assignment." Flight 837, a Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner from Chicago O'Hare to San Francisco International, was still boarding. The first-class cabin, with its 1-2-1 configuration Polaris seating, was half filled with business travelers settling in for the 4-hour journey. The boarding process halted as the confrontation unfolded. Passengers pausing mid-aisle, flight attendants tensing as they sensed trouble brewing. Gabriela Ramirez, a flight attendant with 12 years' experience on international and domestic routes, noticed the disruption immediately. Her trained eye recognized the familiar pattern, an entitled passenger assuming authority over someone they perceived as less deserving. She began moving toward the confrontation, already mentally reviewing the conflict de-escalation protocols from her most recent Passenger Service Excellence Training Module 5.7. "Is there a problem here?" Gabriella asked, positioning herself between Diane and Marcus, her professional tone masking her growing concern. She activated the silent alert function on her company-issued communication device, a standard procedure when potential passenger conflicts arise during boarding. "Yes," Diane responded, not even looking at Gabriella but continuing to stare at Marcus. "This child is in my daughter's seat. We specifically requested a window seat in first class because Olivia gets anxious during takeoff. He needs to move to whatever seat he's actually assigned to." "Ma'am, I'd be happy to check both boarding passes," Gabriella offered, extending her hand toward Diane while maintaining the proper 18-inch customer service distance specified in airline protocols. Nearby, Thomas Reynolds, a 54-year-old corporate ethics consultant returning from a diversity and inclusion leadership conference, discreetly slipped his phone from his jacket pocket and began recording. As the lead author of Accountability Frameworks in Modern Organizations, a Post-Pandemic Approach, he recognized the potential educational value of documenting such incidents. Across the aisle, retired teacher Margaret Jenkins, her silver hair framing a face lined with 70 years of experience, watched with growing concern, her hand unconsciously touching the civil rights button pinned to her cardigan, a relic from her participation in the 1968 Chicago protests. "My boarding pass shows seat 2A, Marcus explained, producing his carefully protected document from the travel wallet his mother had given him for the trip. "I bought this ticket myself. I have the confirmation email and receipt on my phone if you need to see those too." Diane's eyes narrowed as she scanned the boarding pass, looking for any flaw she could exploit. Finding none. Her expression hardened further. "Well, there's obviously been some mistake," she insisted. "A child your age couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket legitimately. Someone must have given it to you, or there's been a computer error in the reservation system. Either way, my daughter needs this specific seat." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the coded language. Behind Diane, 14-year-old Olivia seemed to shrink into herself, mortified by her mother's behavior, but lacking the courage to intervene more forcefully. "Actually, ma'am," Marcus replied with remarkable composure, "I saved for this ticket for almost 2 years. I started when I was 9. I have the receipt on my phone if you'd like to see it." He reached for his backpack, but Diane waved dismissively. That's not necessary. What's necessary is for you to understand that my daughter is the kind of person who belongs in first class. We're the kind of family that flies first class. Perhaps in economy. There's a nice seat next to someone who can keep an eye on you during the flight. The cabin temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees with those words. Gabriella's professional mask slipped for just a moment, her eyes widening at the blatant implication. Thomas Reynolds' finger hovered over the share button on his phone, already composing the text to accompany the video witnessing textbook discriminatory behavior on UA837. Note the specific language markers indicating assumptions based on race/age rather than factual verification. Ma'am, Gabriella interjected with renewed authority. I need to see your boarding pass as well. Please. Diane reluctantly handed over her document, maintaining her imperious stare at Marcus, who had returned to sitting perfectly straight, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. Your dignity isn't given to you by others. It's something you claim through your own behavior. Gabriella examined both boarding passes carefully, then looked up with professional neutrality. Ms. Harrison, your boarding passes indicate seats 23C and 23D in the main cabin. Zone 4, boarding group 2. This young man's pass correctly shows him assigned to seat 2A in first class, Zone 1. His ticket is valid, properly purchased, and verified in our system under locator code H7R9P2. That's impossible, Diane insisted, her voice rising. Check again. There must be a mistake in your passenger name record system. We always fly first class. We're platinum members. More passengers were noticing now, conversations dying as they turned to observe the unfolding drama. Several more phones appeared, recording discreetly from various angles. The incident was no longer private, it was becoming a documented public confrontation with multiple digital witnesses. I've confirmed the information in our Sabre reservation system, Gabriella replied evenly. Marcus is correctly seated in his assigned first-class seat. I'd be happy to help you and your daughter find your assigned seats in the main cabin, which will be boarding in approximately 17 minutes. Do you know who I am? Diane's voice took on a dangerous edge. My husband is Richard Harrison, Chief Financial Officer at NextGen Investments. We don't fly economy, ever. I'm a Platinum Elite member with over 200,000 miles this year alone. Olivia tugged at her mother's Brunello Cucinelli cashmere sleeve again, whispering, Mom, please stop. Everyone's watching. Her $475 Golden Goose sneakers shuffled nervously on the premium cabin carpet. But Diane was beyond hearing her daughter's pleas. She was locked in a power struggle she refused to lose, especially not to a child she had already decided didn't belong in her privileged world. I want to speak to your supervisor immediately, Diane demanded, turning her attention fully to Gabriella now. This is completely unacceptable service. If this child won't voluntarily move to accommodate my daughter's medical needs, then I expect the airline to rectify the situation. Marcus sat quietly, his exterior calm betraying none of the turmoil inside, maintaining the same composed dignity that Solomon Northup, from 12 years a slave, showed even in the harshest circumstances. He had worked so hard for this seat, sacrificed so much, all to surprise his grandfather with his achievement. Now this woman was trying to take it away simply because she couldn't imagine a young black boy legitimately belonging in first class. Ma'am, Gabriella responded with practiced patience, I understand you're upset, but our seating assignments are final unless there's a safety issue or aircraft change. Marcus has a valid first-class ticket for seat 2A. You and your daughter have valid tickets for the main cabin. I'd be happy to escort you there now as we're preparing for departure, according to Federal Aviation Regulation 14, CFR 121. 586 regarding boarding procedures. Diane's face flushed with rage. Her carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement was colliding with the immovable reality of airline protocols in a child who refused to be intimidated. This is absolutely ridiculous, she hissed. I've never been treated this way in my life. I'm not moving until this situation is resolved properly. Get your manager, get the captain, get whoever is in charge of this aircraft, because I am not leaving until my daughter gets the seat she deserves. The gauntlet had been thrown down. The confrontation had escalated beyond a simple seating dispute into something much larger, a public power struggle with undertones of privilege, prejudice, and the question of who truly belonged in seats of prestige and comfort. What Diane Harrison didn't realize was that her very public demand was about to be answered in a way she never expected, and the consequences would reach far beyond Flight 837. Marcus Wilson had never been the kind of child who expected things to be handed to him. Growing up in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Chicago's South Side with his mother, Patricia, a dedicated emergency room nurse at Cook County Hospital, he had learned early that anything worth having required sacrifice and hard work. The idea for his first-class journey had begun 20 months earlier. During his grandfather's annual Christmas visit, Colonel James Wilson, USAF retired, had flown in from San Francisco as he did every year, bringing with him the quiet dignity and powerful presence that had defined him throughout his 30-year military career. At dinner that night, the colonel had described his recent first-class flight experience with the kind of precise detail that made 9-year-old Marcus feel as if he were right there in the leather seat. The difference isn't just about the comfort, young man, Colonel Wilson had explained, cutting his turkey with military precision. It's about proving to yourself that you can achieve things that others might think are beyond your reach. That night, after his grandfather had retired to the guest room, Marcus had emptied his Spider-Man piggy bank onto his bed and counted the contents $27.42. Not even close to enough for a first-class ticket, but a seed had been planted. The next morning, Marcus approached his grandfather with uncharacteristic seriousness. "Grandpa, I want to fly first class to visit you next year. How much does it cost?" Colonel Wilson had studied his grandson thoughtfully, recognizing the determination in the boy's eyes, the same expression he'd seen in his own son's eyes before cancer had taken him 5 years earlier, leaving Marcus fatherless at age 6. "About $1,500, give or take," the colonel answered honestly. "That's a lot of money, Marcus." "I'm going to save it," the boy declared without hesitation. "I'm going to earn it myself and surprise you." Instead of dismissing the child's ambition, Colonel Wilson had nodded seriously. "If you decide that's your mission, I'll help you develop a strategic approach. Nothing worthwhile comes without sacrifice and planning." That afternoon, they created what the colonel called Operation First Class, a detailed savings plan with income projections, expense reductions, and milestone targets. Marcus would need to save $75 each month, a daunting sum for a 9-year-old. What followed was 20 months of remarkable discipline from a child so young. Marcus started a greeting card business, creating hand-designed cards for neighbors and family friends. He took on extra chores for his mother and for elderly residents in their apartment building. He walked dogs, watered plants when owners were away, tutored younger children in math, his best subject. Each dollar earned went into a special account his mother had helped him open at the Southside Community Federal Credit Union. Birthday money, Christmas gifts, reward money for good grades all went into the growing fund. While his friends spent their allowances on video games and candy, Marcus stayed focused on his goal. When the ice cream truck came through the neighborhood, he walked the other way. When new Air Jordans became the must-have fashion at his school, he wore his old sneakers until the soles had holes. His mother offered to help, but Marcus was adamant this achievement would be his alone. Through it all, Colonel Wilson provided long-distance mentorship through weekly video calls, teaching his grandson lessons that went far beyond financial planning. "Remember, Marcus," he would say, his military posture evident even through the screen. "Your dignity isn't determined by what seat you sit in or what others think of you. It's about how you carry yourself, especially when someone tries to make you feel small." These weren't abstract concepts to Colonel Wilson. As one of the first black officer pilots in the 33rd Tactical Fighter Wing during the late 1980s, he had faced discrimination and doubt throughout his distinguished career. After graduating with honors from the Air Force Academy in Merit, he had been repeatedly passed over for choice assignments despite outstanding performance evaluations. In 1980, a senior officer had directly questioned whether someone like him belonged in the cockpit of an F-15 Eagle, suggesting he might be more comfortable in a support role. Colonel Wilson had responded not with anger, but with excellence, eventually becoming one of the most decorated pilots in his squadron during Operation Desert Storm. His 107 successful combat missions and the Distinguished Flying Cross he earned spoke louder than any prejudice. These experiences had shaped his philosophy about responding to discrimination, a philosophy he now passed to his grandson. "When someone tries to diminish you because of how you look," he told Marcus, "that reveals their character, not yours. Your job is to maintain your dignity and never let anyone make you believe you don't belong somewhere you've earned the right to be. By the time Marcus had saved $1,583.47 enough for the ticket plus a small buffer, he had internalized these lessons so deeply they had become part of his character. The day he purchased the ticket online, with his mother supervising, was one of the proudest moments of his young life. He printed the confirmation and placed it in a frame beside his bed, a daily reminder of what persistence could achieve. What Marcus didn't fully understand was that his journey to earn that first-class seat had given him something far more valuable than just a comfortable place to sit. It had shaped him into someone who knew his own worth, someone who couldn't be easily intimidated or made to feel less than, qualities he would need sooner than he realized. While Marcus Wilson was learning lessons about dignity and self-worth in his Southside apartment, Diane Harrison was living a very different reality in her 5-bedroom Highland Park mansion on Chicago's North Shore, where the median household income of $211,250 was over 7 times that of Chicago's South Side neighborhoods. Born Diane Pritchard to old money, her father had been a senior partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. Her mother from banking royalty, Diane had never known a world where her desires weren't immediately satisfied. As an only child, she had attended North Shore Country Day School, where her mediocre academic performance was overlooked due to her family's generous donations to building funds and scholarship programs. When teachers attempted to address her entitlement issues in elementary school, her parents had simply moved her to another exclusive academy where their money could purchase not just education but deference. By high school, the pattern was set. Diane expected the world to accommodate her, and through her family's wealth and connections, it generally did. Her marriage to Richard Harrison had been strategic rather than passionate. He had the ambition and financial acumen she respected. She had the social connections he needed to advance in Chicago's elite financial circles. Together, they formed a partnership that elevated both their standings. Richard's rise to chief financial officer at NextGen Investments had been accelerated by introductions Diane orchestrated at charity galas and country club functions, where she made sure he met the right board members and investors. Their daughter Olivia had been born into this world of privilege. Though unlike her mother, she seemed uncomfortable with its excesses and unearned advantages. From an early age, Olivia showed signs of a sensitivity and empathy that bewildered Diane. When 14-year-old Olivia suggested they volunteer at a homeless shelter during Thanksgiving, Diane had responded with characteristic dismissiveness. "That's what we make donations for. Darling, people like us write checks. We don't serve soup." Diane's daily life was a carefully choreographed performance of privilege. Her personal assistant managed her schedule of spa appointments, charity committee meetings, and shopping excursions. Her household staff, none of whom she knew by name, maintained her perfect environment. Her social media presence portrayed a flawless existence of vacation homes, designer purchases, and exclusive events, carefully curated to generate envy among her 17,428 followers. What wasn't visible in those Instagram posts was Diane's profound insecurity, her deep-seated fear that without the trappings of wealth and status, she might be revealed as fundamentally unremarkable. This anxiety manifested as a need to constantly assert her superiority, particularly over those she perceived as beneath her social standing. Restaurant servers, retail clerks, hotel staff all had felt the sting of Diane's condescension. "Do you know who I am?" had become her reflexive response whenever she encountered even the slightest resistance to her demands. Usually, the question alone was enough to secure compliance, as businesses calculated that appeasing one difficult, wealthy customer was simpler than enduring a public scene. The previous Christmas, at the exclusive Hawthorne Hotel's holiday brunch, Diane had publicly berated a young black hostess who had initially failed to find her reservation, demanding the girl be fired even after the misunderstanding was resolved. Richard had quietly doubled their tip and apologized to management, a pattern that had become routine in their marriage. "You embarrassed me," Diane had hissed in the car afterward, "taking their side against your own wife." "It was a simple mistake, Diane," Richard had replied wearily. "The girl was new. It's the holidays. They were understaffed." "That's not the point," she'd insisted. "The point is respect. People need to understand who they're dealing with." It was this worldview that respect meant deference to her status rather than basic human dignity that Diane carried with her onto Flight 837. When she boarded and discovered her tickets were for the main cabin rather than first class, A booking error she refused to acknowledge might have been her own. Her immediate reaction was not to accept the reality, but to identify someone she deemed less deserving who could be displaced. The sight of a young black boy sitting alone in first class had triggered her immediate assessment. Here was someone who didn't belong, someone who could be moved without consequence. The fact that Marcus was a child made him an even easier target. Children were supposed to defer to adults, especially adults of her social standing. What Diane couldn't possibly understand was that her confrontation with Marcus Wilson would become the collision of two entirely different value systems, one built on entitlement and external validation, the other on earned accomplishment and internal dignity. And for the first time in her privileged existence, Diane Harrison was about to discover that money and status couldn't always dictate the outcome. Olivia Harrison had spent 14 years in the uncomfortable position of loving a mother whose behavior increasingly horrified her. As a young child, she had accepted her mother's actions as normal, not knowing any different. But as she grew older and her world expanded beyond Highland Park's bubble of privilege, awareness had dawned gradually, then overwhelmingly. It started with small moments, witnessing her mother's coldness toward household staff, observing her father's quiet apologies in restaurants after her mother had berated servers, seeing the expressions on people's faces when Diane turned away. By middle school, Olivia had developed what she called her internal cringe, the ability to maintain an outward calm while inwardly recoiling from her mother's behavior. School had become Olivia's refuge. At the progressive private academy her parents had selected for its prestige rather than its values, she encountered ideas and perspectives that challenged everything about her upbringing. Her favorite teacher, Ms. Bernard Rodriguez, taught social studies through a lens of equity and justice, introducing concepts like systemic inequality, privilege, and unconscious bias that made Olivia question the foundations of her privileged existence. Online, Olivia followed social justice accounts and youth activists, absorbing their messages in secret, aware that her mother would disapprove. Her TikTok feed was filled with content her Highland Park friends never saw: documentaries about redlining in Chicago neighborhoods, personal stories from teens with vastly different life experiences, urgent calls to recognize privilege and use it responsibly. While her mother curated an Instagram presence of perfect family moments and luxury vacations, Olivia maintained a private Twitter account where she engaged with ideas about dismantling systems of oppression and acknowledging unearned advantages. The cognitive dissonance between her evolving worldview and her daily reality created a constant state of internal conflict. Richard Harrison, absorbed in his corporate responsibilities and conflict-averse by nature, remained largely oblivious to his daughter's transformation. Diane, when she noticed Olivia's increasing discomfort with family traditions and values, dismissed it as a phase or that liberal nonsense they're teaching at that school. The week before the flight to San Francisco, Olivia had experienced what she considered a breaking point. During a dinner party at their home, Diane had made a casual racist remark about their neighbor's new landscaper. When Olivia had challenged her, suggesting the comment was inappropriate, Diane had laughed dismissively. "Darling, don't be so sensitive," she'd said, patting Olivia's hand condescendingly. "When you're older, you'll understand how the world really works." That night, Olivia had written in her journal, "I don't want to understand how her world works. I don't want that to be my world. There has to be a way to be wealthy without being awful to people who aren't." Now, standing in the first-class cabin of Flight 837, watching her mother attempt to displace a young boy from his rightfully purchased seat, Olivia felt the familiar internal cringe intensify into something more powerful, something like resolve. The mortification was still there, burning her cheeks and making her wish the luxurious carpet would open and swallow her whole. But beneath it was a growing certainty that this moment might require more from her than silent embarrassment. As her mother's voice grew louder and more demanding, Olivia found herself looking directly at Marcus for the first time, not just as an obstacle to her mother's will, but as a person with dignity and rights. In his composed expression and straight posture, she recognized something she had been searching for in herself: the courage to stand firm in what was right, regardless of the social cost. This realization didn't immediately translate into action. 14 years of acquiescence created powerful inertia. But as the confrontation escalated, something was shifting within Olivia Harrison, something that would soon surprise both her mother and herself. Flight attendant Gabriela Ramirez had witnessed variations of this scene countless times during her 12-year career. The dynamics were always similar, though the details changed: a passenger with privilege encountering resistance to their sense of entitlement, usually at the expense of someone more vulnerable. Born in Albuquerque to Mexican immigrant parents who had worked service jobs all their lives, her father as a hotel maintenance supervisor, her mother as a housekeeper, Gabriela understood the invisible hierarchies of the service industry intimately. She had worked her way through community college waiting tables, where she learned to navigate the complex power dynamics between those who served and those being served. When she joined the airline at 24, Gabriela had quickly recognized that the confined space of an aircraft created a unique social environment where these dynamics became even more pronounced. The limited resources, the temporary but absolute authority of the crew, the enforced proximity of strangers from different backgrounds, all combined to either bring out people's best qualities or reveal their worst impulses. Over the years, she had developed an almost prescient ability to identify potential conflicts before they fully emerged. Her coworkers joked that she had passenger radar, the uncanny knack for knowing which boarding travelers might become problems during the flight. This skill had earned her a position training new flight attendants in conflict de-escalation, where she emphasized one core principle: your authority comes from your professionalism, not your uniform. Gabriela's approach to passenger conflicts was methodical, developed through experience and refined through the airline's increasingly sophisticated training programs. Step 1, assess the situation objectively. Step 2, verify facts before taking action. Step 3, de-escalate through calm authority rather than confrontation. Step 4, enforce boundaries clearly when necessary. Step 5, document everything according to the airline's incident reporting system, IRS protocols for potential follow-up. As she watched the interaction between Diane Harrison and young Marcus Wilson, Gabriela was already mentally documenting the key elements. The passenger in seat 2A had a valid first-class ticket, confirmed through the Sabre reservation system. The adult passenger had main cabin tickets but was demanding the first-class seat. The adult was using language that implied the child didn't belong in first class, with clear undertones suggesting this assessment was based on factors beyond just age. While maintaining her professional demeanor, Gabriela was making strategic decisions about how to handle the escalating situation. She had already verified the facts by checking both boarding passes. She had attempted de-escalation by offering to help Diane and Olivia find their assigned seats. Now, as Diane demanded to speak with a supervisor, Gabriela was calculating whether this situation required higher intervention under the airline's Passenger Conflict Management Protocol 3-4, which addressed potential discrimination incidents. In her earpiece, Gabriela could hear the pre-departure checklist proceeding. The aircraft door was scheduled to close in approximately 12 minutes. Captain Michael Ramirez had a perfect on-time departure record for the past 14 months, something he took great pride in maintaining. Involving him would be a significant escalation, potentially delaying departure and affecting performance metrics for flight operations, not a decision Gabriela would make lightly. Captain Michael Ramirez was completing his pre-flight checks in the cockpit when the first report of the disturbance reached him. At 52, with 27 years of commercial flying experience following his early career as a Marine Corps pilot, Ramirez had developed an almost sixth sense about his aircraft and everyone in it. Potential situation in first class, his co-pilot mentioned casually, after receiving a text from another crew member. Seating dispute. Possible code yellow under passenger management protocols. Ramirez nodded without looking up from his checklist. Seating disputes were routine, usually resolved quickly by the cabin crew without requiring his intervention. Only in his most recent crew resource management training, the new module on passenger conflict management that all captains were required to complete, had there been increased emphasis on the captain's role in addressing situations with potential discriminatory elements. Let me know if it escalates to code orange, Habib replied, continuing through his methodical preparation. We're 12 minutes from door closure, and I want to maintain our on-time performance metrics. Michael Ramirez approached flying with the same disciplined precision he had learned during his military service with Marine Attack Squadron 214 VMA 214, where he had flown AV-8B Harrier II aircraft during Operation Desert Storm. Each flight was a mission with clear parameters, potential variables, and established protocols. His reputation throughout the airline was one of calm competence and unwavering principles. Junior pilots requested assignment to his flights for the opportunity to learn not just technical skills, but professional judgment. What few passengers ever realized was that beyond his authoritative presence and technical expertise, Captain Ramirez considered himself fundamentally a guardian of safety, not just physical safety, but the broader concept of creating a secure environment where every passenger was treated with dignity and respect. His Marine background had taught him that true leadership wasn't about asserting authority, but about protecting those under your command. On his aircraft, that meant every passenger, regardless of age, race, or ticket class. As the seating dispute continued in the first-class cabin, neither Diane Harrison nor Marcus Wilson could possibly know that their confrontation was about to involve someone whose definition of justice and responsibility would reshape the outcome in ways neither could anticipate. "This is discrimination against my family," Diane Harrison declared loudly, her voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin and beyond into the boarding area. "We are being denied accommodations that we clearly deserve, while others who don't belong are being given preferential treatment." Flight attendant Gabriela Ramirez maintained her professional composure, though the tightening around her eyes revealed her growing concern about the escalating situation. According to the airline's Passenger Conflict Resolution Manual, Section 7.32, Diane's choice of words, particularly "don't belong," had crossed a line that transformed this from a simple sighting dispute into a potential discriminatory incident requiring elevated response protocols. "Ms. Harrison," Gabriela said with deliberate calmness, "I've verified both boarding passes through our Sabre reservation system, and I can assure you there's no discrimination occurring. Every passenger is entitled to their assigned seat, which they've purchased. Marcus has a valid first-class ticket for Seat 2A, confirmation code H7R9P2. You and your daughter have valid tickets for the main cabin, confirmation code TK6L83. These are simply the facts of the situation." "Facts can be incorrect," Diane insisted, shifting strategies. "Your computer system has obviously made a mistake. There is no possible way this child purchased a first-class ticket legitimately. Someone must have given it to him, or there's been an error in your reservation system." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Several nearby passengers exchanged glances. Recognizing the coded language for what it was, Thomas Reynolds began typing notes on his phone alongside the recording, identifying specific statements that constituted evidence of discriminatory intent under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Marcus sat perfectly still, his exterior calm masking the emotional turmoil beneath. 20 months of saving, of sacrifice, of working toward a goal all being dismissed because this woman couldn't imagine he belonged in a first-class seat. "I can show you my receipt," Marcus offered quietly, reaching for his phone. "I saved for this seat for almost 2 years. I have the transaction record from the credit union account I used." Diane waved her hand dismissively. "I'm not interested in whatever story you've been told to tell. I'm a Platinum Elite member with over 200,000 miles this year alone. My family flies first class exclusively. This situation is completely unacceptable." Thomas Reynolds, the corporate ethics consultant in Seat 3D, continued recording discreetly. In his 25-year career specializing in workplace discrimination cases, he had developed a keen eye for these situations. What he was witnessing was textbook discriminatory behavior assumptions based on appearance rather than facts. Dismissal of evidence that contradicted those assumptions. Escalating demands for special treatment based on status. "Excuse me," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I couldn't help overhearing. It seems quite clear that this young man has a valid ticket for his seat. Perhaps the simplest solution would be for everyone to sit in their assigned seats so we can depart on time." Diane turned toward him with cold fury. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Thomas replied calmly, "it concerns everyone on this flight. We all have connections to make, appointments to keep, and we're all witnessing a situation that seems unnecessarily contentious." Across the aisle, retired teacher Margaret Jenkins nodded in agreement. During her 40-year career in Chicago public schools, she had witnessed countless instances where children of color were subjected to different standards and expectations. The scene unfolding before her was painfully familiar. "Young man," she said to Marcus, her voice carrying the warmth and authority of a lifetime in classrooms, "you have every right to sit exactly where you are. Don't let anyone tell you different." Diane's face flushed with indignation. "I don't know what kind of scene you people are trying to create here, But my daughter has anxiety and needs a window seat. I've been a loyal customer of this airline for 15 years, and I expect to be treated accordingly. The phrase "you people" sent a ripple through the cabin. More passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing another coded expression that violated the airline's Passenger Respect Policy PRP 2023. Phones continued recording from multiple angles, capturing every word and gesture. According to the timestamp on Thomas Reynolds' iPhone 14 Pro, the confrontation had been ongoing for 7 minutes and 42 seconds, well beyond the 5-minute threshold for mandatory supervisor notification under airline protocols. Gabriella recognized that the situation was approaching a tipping point. Professional training and personal experience told her that Diane Harrison wasn't going to back down voluntarily. The confrontation had become about much more than seating. It had become a power struggle laden with undertones of racial and class prejudice that potentially violated 14 CFR 91.11 regarding interference with crew members. "Miss Harrison," she said with quiet authority, "I need to be very clear. Marcus has a valid first-class ticket for Seat 2A. That seat is his for this flight according to Federal Aviation Administration regulations governing passenger seating assignments. I can help you find your assigned seats in the main cabin, or if you prefer, I can check if there are any window seats available for your daughter. But Marcus will not be moved from his legitimate seat." "This is outrageous," Diane sputtered. "I want to speak to your supervisor immediately. This level of customer service is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how much money we spend with this airline annually? Our household travel budget exceeds $75,000 per year." Gabriella maintained eye contact, her expression professional but unmoved. "I understand you're upset, but our policy is clear according to the Contract of Carriage Section 25.4. Each passenger is entitled to their assigned seat, which they have purchased. No passenger can be required to give up their seat unless there is a safety issue or aircraft change." As the standoff continued, Olivia Harrison's mortification intensified. Her mother's behavior was bad enough at private family functions or in restaurants, but this public display of entitlement and prejudice was unbearable. With each passing moment, Olivia felt something shifting inside her, embarrassment transforming into a different emotion, resolve. "Mom," she said, louder than before, "please stop. This is wrong. He paid for his seat. We should just go to our seats." Diane turned to her daughter with shock. "Olivia, this isn't about money. This is about principle, about who belongs where, about respect for people of our standing." The naked elitism in this statement caused several passengers to inhale sharply. Thomas Reynolds' eyebrows rose as he continued recording, mentally noting the timestamp for this particularly damning comment. "Ma'am," Marcus said suddenly, his young voice steady despite the pressure of the situation, "my grandfather taught me that respect isn't about standing, it's about character." The simplicity and dignity of this statement landed like a thunderclap in the tense cabin. Margaret Jenkins nodded approvingly, tears springing to her eyes at the wisdom coming from one so young. Thomas Reynolds smiled slightly, impressed by the boy's composure under pressure. Diane stared at Marcus, momentarily speechless at being addressed so directly by a child she had been attempting to intimidate. Her shock quickly transformed into rage. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she hissed. "This is exactly the problem with your generation, no respect for adults or authority. In my day, children knew their place and didn't presume to lecture their betters." "That's enough." Gabriella's voice cut through the tension, her professional tone sharpened with authority. "Ms. Harrison, I need you to lower your voice and refrain from speaking to any passenger in that manner. Under Federal Aviation Regulation 14 CFR 121, 580 regarding passenger interference with crew members, I'm required to inform you that if you can't comply with basic courtesy requirements, I'll need to involve the captain." The mention of the captain was a significant escalation, one that Gabriella hadn't made lightly. In the hierarchy of aircraft authority, the captain represented the final word, with powers that extended far beyond seating assignments to include removal of disruptive passengers under 49 U.S.C. 44902. "Please do involve the captain," Diane replied, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "I'm sure he'll understand the situation properly. Someone with actual authority and perspective on how loyal first-class customers should be treated." Her confidence stemmed from decades of experience with authority figures ultimately deferring to her status, wealth, and demands. Throughout her privileged life, Diane had learned that persistence and escalation usually resulted in getting her way, especially when managers and supervisors became involved. Gabriella nodded once. Her decision made. I'll contact him immediately via the interphone system. In the meantime, I must ask everyone to please remain calm and in place according to safety protocols. She moved toward the aircraft interphone, pressing the button that would connect her directly to the cockpit. Captain, this is Gabriella. We have a code orange situation in first class that requires your attention when possible. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Ramirez received the call with a slight frown. Code orange indicated a passenger conflict with potential discriminatory elements, a situation that had escalated beyond the flight attendant's authority to resolve. Given they were still 12 minutes from scheduled departure, he made a quick decision. I'll be right out, he replied, completing his current checklist item before standing. First Officer Jenkins, continue with the pre-flight checks according to SOP. I'll be back shortly. As Gabriella returned to the confrontation, Diane Harrison's confidence was visible in her posture and expression. She straightened her designer blazer and adjusted her gold necklace, preparing for what she assumed would be her imminent victory. In her experience, men in positions of authority, particularly older men, were quick to accommodate her demands, especially when she emphasized her husband's corporate position and their family's financial status. The captain is coming to address the situation, Gabriella informed everyone, her tone neutral but her eyes conveying a message to Marcus that he shouldn't worry. Marcus nodded slightly, his posture still perfectly straight, his grandfather's military influence evident in his composed demeanor. 20 months of working toward a goal had taught him persistence. His grandfather's lessons had taught him dignity under pressure. Around them, the first-class cabin had become utterly silent, all conversations suspended as passengers waited to see how this confrontation would resolve. In the main cabin beyond, word had spread about the situation unfolding at the front of the aircraft. More passengers had paused in the boarding process, creating a bottleneck as they watched the drama through the dividing curtain. This is completely ridiculous, Diane muttered, though loud enough to be heard. All this fuss because one child refuses to understand how the world actually works. Olivia stood slightly apart from her mother now, the physical distance reflecting her growing emotional separation. Her eyes met Marcus's briefly, an unspoken apology passing between them. The sound of the cockpit door opening drew everyone's attention forward. Captain Michael Ramirez emerged, his presence immediately commanding the space. At 6 feet tall with silver-streaked dark hair and the erect posture of his military background, he projected natural authority without needing to assert it. His uniform was impeccable, 4 gold stripes on each sleeve, wings pinned precisely above his left breast pocket. His name tag perfectly level on his right, his expression composed but alert as he assessed the situation with the experienced eye of someone who had managed countless in-flight emergencies. What no one in that cabin yet realized was that they were about to witness not just the resolution of a seating dispute, but a moment of justice that would reverberate far beyond Flight 837. Diane Harrison stepped forward immediately, assuming the role of the aggrieved party entitled to the captain's immediate sympathy. "Captain, thank goodness you're here," she began, her voice modulated to convey both distress and authority. "I've been trying to resolve a simple seating issue for my daughter, who has anxiety and needs a window seat in first class. We're being treated appallingly by your staff, and this child refuses to move to a more appropriate seat in economy." Captain Ramirez listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing as he observed not just Diane's words, but her body language, tone, and the reactions of other passengers. When she finished, he spoke with the measured calm of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. "Thank you for explaining your perspective, ma'am. I'd like to hear from all parties involved before making any determinations. First, may I see the boarding passes in question?" Gabriella handed him both documents, which he examined with methodical precision, the same attention to detail he applied to pre-flight instrument checks on the Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner's Collins Aerospace ProLine Fusion avionics system. His eyes moved from the papers to Marcus, then to Diane and Olivia, then back to the boarding passes. "Young man," he said, addressing Marcus directly, "this appears to be your assigned seat, 2A, first class. Is that correct?" "Yes," Marcus replied. I saved for this ticket for almost 2 years to surprise my grandfather in San Francisco. I have the receipt on my phone if you need to verify it. Captain Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. That won't be necessary. Your boarding pass is legitimate and your ticket has been properly purchased according to our verification systems. According to our records and policies, this seat is rightfully yours for this flight. He turned to Diane, whose confident expression was beginning to falter. Ms. Harrison, your boarding passes clearly show seats 23C and 23D in the main cabin. Those are the seats you and your daughter purchased and are assigned to for this flight according to the airline's contract of carriage. There must be some mistake, Diane insisted, though with less certainty than before. We always fly first class. My husband is Richard Harrison, CFO of Next Gen Investments. We're Platinum Elite members with over 200,000 miles annually. I understand your loyalty status, Miss Harrison, Captain Ramirez replied, but status doesn't change the fundamental fact that for this particular flight, you purchased main cabin seats. That's what your boarding passes indicate, and that's what our system confirms. Diane's face flushed deeper, her strategy failing in the face of the captain's calm factuality. She switched tactics. My daughter has severe anxiety. Captain, she needs a window seat. Surely you can make an accommodation for medical necessity under the Air Carrier Access Act. That boy can sit anywhere he's traveling alone. We're a family. Captain Ramirez turned his attention to Olivia, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Young lady, is this accurate? Do you have diagnosed anxiety that requires specific seating accommodations? Placed on the spot and faced with direct questioning about a condition her mother had invented moments before, Olivia hesitated, the truth ward with 14 years of trained deference to her mother's narrative. I get nervous sometimes during takeoff, she admitted, but I don't have diagnosed anxiety, and I'm okay sitting in our assigned seats. Diane's head whipped toward her daughter, shock and betrayal evident in her expression. Olivia, Captain Ramirez nodded, accepting this information with the same impartial assessment he'd given everything else. Thank you for your honesty. He turned back to Diane, his expression still professional, but with a new firmness in his tone. Ms. Harrison, the facts of this situation are clear according to Federal Aviation Regulation 14 CFR 250.2A governing seat assignments. Marcus has a valid first-class ticket for seat 2A. You and your daughter have valid tickets for seats 23C and 23D in the main cabin. There is no medical necessity that would require special accommodation under the Air Carrier Access Act. Diane sensed her position weakening and made a desperate final attempt. This is about principle, Captain, about who belongs where. Surely you understand that some passengers are more suitable for first class than others. This child clearly doesn't understand the standards and expectations of premium travel. The thinly veiled prejudice in this statement caused a ripple of murmurs throughout the cabin. Thomas Reynolds' eyebrows shot up as he continued recording, mentally flagging this particularly revealing comment that constituted potential evidence of discriminatory intent under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Captain Ramirez's expression changed subtly, not angry, but more resolved. When he spoke Vagan, his voice carried the weight of moral authority beyond his official position. Ms. Harrison, I need to be extremely clear about something. On this aircraft, the only standard that determines where a passenger belongs is the seat number printed on their valid boarding pass. Marcus has earned his place in first class through the legitimate purchase of his ticket. The suggestion that he doesn't belong there for any other reason is both incorrect and inappropriate under our airline's non-discrimination policy. The direct challenge to her worldview left Diane momentarily speechless. Before she could recover, Captain Ramirez continued, I have a responsibility under Federal Aviation Regulation 14 CFR 121-533 to ensure that every passenger on this aircraft is treated with dignity and respect. That includes Marcus. Based on what I've observed and the reports I've received, your behavior toward him has been unacceptable under our passenger courtesy guidelines. The tide had turned completely. Diane's confidence crumbled as she realized that unlike hotel managers or restaurant supervisors who had capitulated to her demands in the past, this authority figure was drawing a clear boundary. This is outrageous, she sputtered. I've never been treated this way in my life. Do you have any idea who my husband is? The connections we have. This will not stand. Captain Ramirez remained unmoved. Miss Harrison, you now have a choice to make. Option 1. You and your daughter can proceed to your assigned seats in the main cabin, and we can depart on schedule. Option 2. If you continue to disrupt the boarding process and harass other passengers, I will be forced to have you removed from this flight under FAA Regulation 14 CFR 91.11, which prohibits interference with crew members in the performance of their duties. The mention of removal from the flight and the specific federal regulations silenced Diane completely. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was confronting an authority figure who was entirely immune to her status, wealth, and threats. In the heavy silence that followed, Olivia stepped forward, her voice small but determined. We'll go to our assigned seats. Captain, I'm sorry for the disruption. Captain Ramirez nodded, acknowledging her maturity with respect. Thank you, young lady. That's a sensible decision. Turning back to Diane, he added, Ms. Harrison, I'll have Gabriella escort you and your daughter to your seats now. I trust there will be no further issues during this flight under Federal Aviation Regulation 14 CFR 91.11. The implication was clear. This was her final warning. Any additional disruption would result in consequences she had likely never experienced in her privileged existence. For Marcus Wilson, watching this unfold from seat 2A, the captain's intervention represented something profound, the validation of his grandfather's teachings about dignity, about standing firm in the face of intimidation, about the difference between true authority and mere status. His seat wasn't just a comfortable place to sit for the next 4 hours. It had become a symbol of something much larger. Captain Ramirez turned to him with a nod of respect that acknowledged this significance. Enjoy your flight to San Francisco, young man. I think your grandfather will be very proud of how you've handled yourself today. As Diane and Olivia began their walk of shame toward the main cabin, escorted by Gabriella, the first-class section erupted in spontaneous applause. The tension that had built during the confrontation released in a wave of collective approval for justice served. What no one realized yet was that this incident was about to extend far beyond Flight 837, as the videos already being uploaded to social media platforms began their viral journey across the internet at a velocity that would soon reach 3.8 million views within the first 24 hours. The moment Captain Michael Ramirez emerged from the cockpit, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin changed instantly. His presence was like a stabilizing force entering a turbulent system, not through intimidation or dominance, but through the quiet authority that came from decades of command experience. Standing 6 feet tall with silver-streaked dark hair and shoulders that maintained the square set of his military days, Captain Ramirez carried himself with the composed dignity of someone who had faced far more serious crises than a seating dispute. His uniform was immaculate, 4 gold stripes on each sleeve, indicating his senior captain status. Wings pinned precisely above his left breast pocket, displaying over 15,000 flight hours. Name tag perfectly level on his right. But it wasn't the uniform that commanded respect. It was the man wearing it. As he stepped into the cabin, his eyes assessed the situation with the rapid efficiency of a pilot scanning instruments during turbulence, taking in Diane Harrison's aggressive posture, Marcus Wilson's composed but tense demeanor, Olivia's embarrassed distance from her mother, and the numerous passengers recording the confrontation on devices that would soon amplify this incident beyond the aircraft's pressurized cabin. Captain, Gabriella said, thank you for coming. We have a code orange situation that has escalated beyond standard resolution procedures according to the Passenger Conflict Management Protocol 3-4. Captain Ramirez nodded once. I understand. Let me speak with everyone involved. Diane Harrison stepped forward immediately, positioning herself as the aggrieved party. Captain, I'm so relieved someone with actual authority has arrived. We've been trying to resolve a simple seating issue, but your staff has been completely unhelpful. My daughter needs a window seat in first class for her anxiety, and this child is refusing to move to economy where he clearly belongs. The captain listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing as he observed not just Diane's words, but the reactions they provoked in others. When she finished, he spoke with measured precision. I appreciate your concern for your daughter, ma'am. Let me gather all the facts before making any determination. May I see the boarding passes in question? Gabriella handed him both documents. He examined them carefully, his attention to detail evident in the methodical way he checked every element, names, seat assignments, ticket classes, confirmation numbers, the same precision he applied to reviewing weight and balance calculations before each flight. "Young man," he said, turning to Marcus, "according to this boarding pass, you're assigned to seat 2A in first class. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, maintaining eye contact despite his nervousness. "I saved for this ticket for almost 2 years to surprise my grandfather in San Francisco. I have the receipt on my phone if you need to see it." "That won't be necessary," Captain Ramirez responded, noting the boy's remarkable composure. "Your boarding pass is valid and your seat assignment is clear according to our Sabre reservation system." He turned to Diane and Olivia. "Ms. Harrison, your boarding passes indicate seats 23C and 23D in the main cabin. Those are your assigned seats for this flight according to Federal Aviation Administration regulations governing passenger seating assignments." "There must be some mistake," Diane insisted, though with less certainty than before. "We always fly first class. My husband is Richard Harrison, CFO of NextGen Investments. We're Platinum Elite members with over 200,000 miles this year alone." Captain Ramirez nodded, acknowledging her statement without being influenced by it. "I understand your loyalty status, Mrs. Harrison, but for this specific flight, the seats you purchased and are assigned to are 23C and 23D in the main cabin. That's what your boarding passes indicate, and that's what our system confirms under reservation code TK6L83. His tone was not unkind, but it carried the unmistakable authority of someone stating facts rather than offering opinions. This clarity seemed to momentarily unbalance Diane, who had expected the typical deference her status usually commanded. "You mentioned your daughter's anxiety," Captain Ramirez continued. "Is this a documented medical condition that requires special accommodation under the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986, 49 U.S.C. 41705? The question was precise, focusing on whether there was a legitimate medical necessity rather than a preference. Diane hesitated, sensing a potential opening, but aware that fabricating a medical condition might cross a line even she was reluctant to cross. "She gets very anxious during flights, especially takeoffs," Diane said, sidestepping the direct question. "A window seat helps her feel more secure." Captain Ramirez turned his attention to Olivia directly. "Young lady, would you be comfortable in your assigned seat in the main cabin if you have medical anxiety that requires specific accommodation? We can explore options within our protocols under 14 CFR Part 382. Put on the spot and faced with direct questioning that required either truth or an explicit lie." Olivia hesitated. The internal conflict was visible on her face, 14 years of deferring to her mother's narrative versus her growing sense that this situation had crossed an ethical line. I get nervous sometimes during takeoff," she admitted finally, "but I don't have diagnosed anxiety. And I'm okay sitting in our assigned seats." The honesty of this statement seemed to cost her considerable effort. Diane's head whipped toward her daughter, shock and betrayal evident in her expression. "Olivia," Captain Ramirez nodded, accepting this information with the same impartial assessment he'd given everything else. "Thank you for your honesty." He turned back to the broader situation, his decision clearly forming. "The facts of this matter are straightforward. Marcus has a valid first-class ticket for seat 2A, which he purchased legitimately. Ms. Harrison and her daughter have valid tickets for seats in the main cabin. There is no medical necessity requiring special accommodation under the Air Carrier Access Act." As Diane opened her mouth to protest again, Captain Ramirez continued with increased firmness. "Furthermore, based on the reports I've received from my crew and what I've observed myself, your behavior toward this young passenger has been inappropriate and potentially discriminatory under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act." The direct naming of her behavior as discriminatory landed like a physical blow. Diane's face flushed deeper, her carefully constructed worldview colliding with an explicit challenge from an authority figure who cited specific legal frameworks. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I'm simply trying to secure appropriate seating for my family. This has nothing to do with anything else." "Ms. Harrison," Captain Ramirez responded, his tone now carrying an edge of steel beneath its professional veneer. "On this aircraft, the only factor that determines where a passenger belongs is the seat number printed on their valid boarding pass. Marcus has earned his place in first class through the legitimate purchase of his ticket. Any suggestion that he doesn't belong there based on other factors is both incorrect and unacceptable under our airline's non-discrimination policy. Section 7.3, the clarity of this statement left no room for misinterpretation. Throughout the cabin, passengers nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears at the straightforward justice of the captain's position. Under Federal Aviation Regulation 14 CFR 91.11, Captain Ramirez continued, interference with flight crew members in the performance of their duties is prohibited. This includes creating disturbances that prevent orderly boarding and preparation for departure. At this point, you have two options. The invocation of the specific federal regulation shifted the dynamic dramatically. This was no longer a customer service issue, but a matter of federal law and flight safety. Option 1, you and your daughter can proceed to your assigned seats in the main cabin, and we can depart on schedule. Option 2, if you continue to disrupt the boarding process and harass other passengers, I will be forced to have you removed from this flight under 49 U.S.C. 44902, which authorizes the removal of passengers for safety reasons. The ultimatum hung in the air, clear and unavoidable. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Diane Harrison was confronting an authority figure entirely immune to her status, wealth, and implicit threats, someone who operated under federal aviation regulations rather than customer service protocol calls designed to placate difficult clients. In the heavy silence that followed, Olivia stepped forward, physically separating herself from her mother's position. We'll go to our assigned seats. Captain, I'm sorry for the disruption. Captain Ramirez acknowledged her maturity with a respectful nod. Thank you, young lady. That's a sensible decision. Turning back to Diane, he added, Gabriella will escort you to your seats now, according to boarding procedures. I trust there will be no further issues during this flight. The implication was clear. This was her final warning. Any additional disruption would result in consequences Diane had likely never experienced in her privileged existence. Before returning to the cockpit, Captain Ramirez turned to Marcus, who had remained composed throughout the entire confrontation. The captain's expression softened slightly as he addressed the boy. Young man, I understand you're traveling to visit your grandfather. Yes, sir. Marcus replied. He's retired Air Force Colonel James Wilson, 33rd Tactical Fighter Wing. Something flickered in Captain Ramirez's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or respect for a fellow military man. The Air Force teaches excellent values about dignity and respect. Your grandfather must be a fine man to have raised a grandson with such composure under pressure. I think you'll be very proud of how you've conducted yourself today. These words' simple acknowledgement of Marcus's dignity and worth seemed to mean more to the boy than the first-class seat itself. His face brightened with quiet pride. Thank you, sir. As Diane and Olivia began their walk of shame toward the main cabin, escorted by Gabriella, the first-class section erupted in spontaneous applause. The tension that had built during the confrontation released in a wave of collective approval for justice served. Thomas Reynolds stopped recording and extended his hand to Marcus. Young man, that was impressive composure under pressure. My name is Thomas Reynolds. I'm a corporate ethics consultant specializing in anti-discrimination frameworks. If you ever need anything in your future career, please contact me. He passed a business card to Marcus, who accepted it with surprised gratitude. Margaret Jenkins leaned across from her seat, her eyes bright with emotion. Your grandfather taught you well, young man. In my 40 years of teaching, I saw too many children told they didn't belong in places they'd earned the right to be. You stood your ground with dignity, exactly as you should have. As the applause subsided and normal boarding resumed, Marcus settled back into seat 2A, the leather upholstery and extra legroom now carrying deeper significance than mere comfort. His seat had become something symbolic representation of his own worth, validation of his grandfather's teachings, tangible proof that dignity and persistence could overcome prejudice. Captain Ramirez returned to the cockpit, where his co-pilot was completing the pre-flight checklist. Everything resolved, the co-pilot asked casually. Yes. Captain Ramirez replied simply, returning to his own preparations. What he didn't mention was that the incident had reminded him powerfully of his own early days in aviation, when as one of the few Hispanic pilots in his squadron, he had faced similar assumptions about where he belonged. In that moment of justice in the first-class cabin, Michael Ramirez hadn't just been enforcing airline policy, he had been standing for a principle that had guided his entire career, that dignity wasn't determined by status or appearance, but by character and conduct. As he settled into his captain's seat and resumed his pre-flight checks on the Collins Aerospace Proline Fusion avionics system, he had no way of knowing that his simple act of fairness was about to be amplified far beyond Flight 837, becoming a powerful example of leadership that would inspire millions across social media platforms where algorithm-driven content distribution would recognize the emotional resonance of the incident and propel it to 3.8 million views within 24 hours. Diane Harrison's face burned with humiliation as she followed flight attendant Gabriela Ramirez down the aisle toward the main cabin. The eyes of every passenger they passed felt like physical touches, some curious, some pitying, some openly disapproving. Behind her, Olivia walked with her head down, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. For the first time in her adult life, Diane was experiencing the consequences of her behavior in a way she couldn't dismiss, deny, or buy her way out of. The captain's clear, unambiguous rejection of her entitlement had stripped away the protective armor of privilege she had worn for decades. Each step through the premium economy section and into the main cabin felt like a public proclamation of her defeat. Worse, she knew that multiple passengers had recorded the entire confrontation. Her mind raced with implications. Would these videos appear online? Would her social circles see them? Would Richard's colleagues at NextGen Investments become aware of the incident? "Here are your seats, 23C and 23D, Gabriela said professionally, gesturing to the middle and aisle seats in the economy section. "Do you need any assistance with your carry-on items?" "No," Diane replied tersely, her voice tight with suppressed fury and mortification. As she settled into the unfamiliar confines of an economy seat, 17, 3 inches wide compared to the 23-inch first-class seating she was accustomed to, the physical discomfort became a tangible reminder of her failure. The narrower space, the reduced legroom, 31 inches versus 48 in first class, the proximity to other passengers all felt like punishments rather than merely different accommodations. Olivia took the middle seat without complaint, fastening her seatbelt and staring straight ahead. The silence between mother and daughter was heavy with unspoken tension. "I can't believe you undermined me like that," Diane finally hissed, keeping her voice low enough that nearby passengers couldn't hear. "Telling the captain you don't have anxiety, after everything I've done for you." Olivia turned to face her mother, something new in her expression, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "Mom, I don't have diagnosed anxiety. That was a lie, and you know it. What you were trying to do to that boy was wrong. I was trying to secure appropriate accommodations for my daughter," Diane insisted, though her justification sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No," Olivia replied quietly but firmly. "You were trying to take something from someone else because you didn't think he deserved it, because you didn't think he belonged there. I saw how you looked at him, what you said about him. It was cruel, Mom, and embarrassing." The directness of this assessment landed like a physical blow. Diane had never heard her daughter speak to her this way with judgment rather than deference. It was as if the incident had catalyzed something in Olivia, breaking through 14 years of reluctant compliance. "You don't understand how the world works," Diane muttered, falling back on her standard response whenever her worldview was challenged. "Maybe I understand better than you think," Olivia responded, turning away to stare out the window across the aisle, a window seat she hadn't actually needed. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, Marcus Wilson was experiencing the aftermath of the confrontation in a very different way. As the initial tension dissolved and normal boarding resumed, passengers approached his seat one by one, offering words of support and encouragement. "You handled that with remarkable maturity," said an older gentleman in a business suit. "Most adults wouldn't have shown such composure." "Your grandfather must be a wonderful man," added a woman traveling with her husband. "The values he's taught you really showed today." Each validation meant more to Marcus than the luxury of his first-class surroundings. His seat was comfortable, certainly, but these affirmations of his dignity and worth were the true reward for standing his ground. Thomas Reynolds, the corporate ethics consultant who had recorded much of the confrontation, leaned across the aisle. "Young man, my name is Thomas Reynolds. I specialize in corporate ethics and discrimination cases, with expertise in Title VI compliance frameworks. The way you handled yourself under pressure was truly impressive." He extended a business card to Marcus, who accepted it with surprised gratitude. "If you're ever interested in an internship when you're older, or if you need any assistance with anything related to this incident, please contact me. People with your character and composure are exactly who we need in positions of influence." Margaret Jenkins, the retired teacher seated nearby, wiped tears from her eyes as she addressed Marcus. "In my 40 years of teaching in Chicago public schools, I saw too many bright young people told they didn't belong in places they'd earned the right to be. You stood your ground with dignity, exactly as you should have." These connections and affirmations were creating something unexpected, a support network forming around Marcus in real time. Adults recognizing his worth and offering pathways to future opportunities. His first-class seat had become more than just a comfortable place to sit. It had become a platform from which his character could be witnessed and acknowledged. Flight attendant Gabriela Ramirez returned to the first-class cabin after settling the Harrisons in economy. She approached Marcus with a warm smile that contrasted with her necessarily professional demeanor during the confrontation. "How are you doing?" she asked quietly, kneeling beside his seat so they were at eye level. "That was an intense situation, and you handled it with remarkable poise." "I'm okay," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. "My grandfather always says that how you act when someone tries to make you feel small shows who you really are inside. I just tried to remember that." Gabriella nodded, impressed by the wisdom in this philosophy. "Your grandfather sounds like a very wise man. I'm sorry you had to experience that situation, but I want you to know that you absolutely belong here. You earned this seat through your hard work and saving, and no one has the right to make you feel otherwise." She glanced around at the other first-class passengers, many of whom were still watching Marcus with expressions of approval and respect. "I think you've made quite an impression on everyone today." As the final boarding procedures completed and the aircraft prepared for departure, the social dynamics within the plane had been fundamentally altered by the confrontation. The first-class cabin had become a community united in their support of Marcus and their approval of the captain's verdict. The economy section surrounding the Harrisons had become a zone of whispers and sidelong glances. As word of the incident spread throughout the aircraft, what none of them yet realized was that the impact of the confrontation was already extending beyond the confines of Flight 837. Thomas Reynolds had sent selected clips of the incident to his professional network with the caption, "Witnessing extraordinary dignity from a young traveler facing blatant discrimination." Captain's response was a masterclass in ethical leadership under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Lisa Wong, a marketing executive in Seat 4B, had uploaded a 2-minute video to her TikTok account with the hashtags #FirstClassKid and #CaptainJustice. Within 17 minutes, TikTok's algorithm had identified the high engagement potential of the content based on watch-through rates and comment velocity, placing it on the For You pages of users interested in social justice content. Sarah Patel, a college student in premium economy who had witnessed the Harrisons' walk of shame, was live tweeting the incident to her 15,000 followers, generating a 243% increase in engagement compared to her typical content. The digital ripples were beginning to spread, turning a private confrontation into a public conversation about entitlement, discrimination, and the dignity of standing your ground. Content moderation algorithms were identifying the video as high-velocity potential viral content across multiple platforms, prioritizing its distribution based on early engagement metrics that exceeded platform averages by 782%. As Captain Ramirez's voice came over the intercom announcing their imminent departure, Marcus settled deeper into his seat, feeling a complex mixture of emotions, pride in having maintained his composure, gratitude for the captain's intervention, excitement about surprising his grandfather, and a new awareness of his own strength in the face of intimidation. He looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about his grandfather waiting for him in San Francisco, unaware that his grandson was arriving not just in first class as planned, but having already embodied the values Colonel Wilson had worked so hard to instill in him. The aircraft began to taxi toward the runway, carrying with it not just 183 passengers and crew, but a story about dignity and justice that was about to resonate far beyond its metal fuselage. As Flight 837 reached cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dinged off and the first-class cabin settled into its luxurious routine. For Marcus Wilson, the first-class experience was everything he had anticipated during his 20 months of saving and now carried additional layers of meaning after the confrontation at boarding. "Can I get you something to drink?" asked Gabriella, approaching his seat with a warm smile. "Apple juice, please," Marcus replied, still somewhat shy despite the confidence he had shown during the confrontation. "Coming right up," Gabriella said, returning moments later with a crystal glass of apple juice served on a small linen-covered tray. "And here's our first-class menu for today. The chef has prepared 3 options for lunch." Marcus accepted the elegant menu card with barely concealed delight, running his fingers over the embossed airline logo. This tangible symbol of luxury, something most passengers might take for granted, represented countless sacrifices for him, birthday money saved instead of spent, odd jobs completed after school, weekends spent helping neighbors with chores when his friends were at the movies. He studied the menu carefully, savoring each description. The grilled salmon with wild rice and seasonal vegetables, the roasted chicken breast with truffle mashed potatoes, the vegetarian option of butternut squash, ravioli, and sage brown butter. "I'll have the chicken, please," he told Gabriella when she returned to take his order, pronouncing truffle carefully, having practiced the unfamiliar word after looking it up online during his research into first-class dining options. As the meal service began, Marcus observed the rituals with fascination. The way the flight attendants laid real linen napkins across passengers' laps, the presentation of warmed bread with actual butter rather than packets, the ceramic plates and metal cutlery instead of plastic, the individual salt and pepper grinders. Each element confirmed that his investment had been worthwhile, not just for the physical comfort, but for the experience itself. When his meal arrived, Marcus took a photo with his phone, careful not to disturb other passengers. He wanted to show his mother and grandfather later, to share this achievement with them. The chicken was tender, the potatoes creamy with an earthy flavor he'd never experienced before. Each bite represented a small victory, not just over Diane Harrison's attempt to displace him, but over the limitations others might have placed on his aspirations. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Gabriella asked, passing by his seat. "Yes, ma'am, it's perfect," Marcus replied with genuine appreciation. "Thank you." "You're very welcome," she said, then added more quietly, "You know, in my 12 years as a flight attendant, I've served many first-class passengers. Some are kind, some are entitled, some are oblivious to the privilege of their position. But I've rarely met anyone who appreciates the experience as much as you do. That makes you truly first class in the ways that matter most." This observation that appreciation rather than entitlement was the mark of true class struck Marcus deeply. It aligned perfectly with his grandfather's teachings about character and dignity being internal qualities rather than external circumstances. As the meal service concluded and the cabin settled into quiet activities, some passengers working on laptops, others watching movies on the seatback Panasonic EX3 entertainment systems, a few napping under the provided Weston Heavenly blankets, Marcus had time to reflect on the confrontation that had begun his journey. He thought about Diane Harrison, who had been so certain of her right to take what belonged to someone else simply because she couldn't imagine he deserved it. He wondered what experiences had shaped her into someone who measured human worth by external markers like age, appearance, and perceived social status rather than character and conduct. He thought about Olivia, whose embarrassment had been visibly painful, caught between loyalty to her mother and her own emerging sense of right and wrong. He remembered her small act of courage in finally speaking truth rather than supporting her mother's fabrications. Most of all, he thought about Captain Ramirez, whose clear moral authority had cut through the tension like a blade, establishing boundaries based on principles rather than power. The captain's words, "Your grandfather must be a fine man to have raised a grandson with such composure under pressure," lingered in Marcus's mind as the highest form of validation. As he gazed out the window at the clouds below, Marcus realized that his first-class journey had become about much more than comfortable seating and premium dining. It had become a testing ground for the values his grandfather had instilled in him: dignity under pressure, persistence toward goals, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing your own worth regardless of others' assessments. The seat itself was luxurious, certainly 23 inches of wide leather upholstery with ample 48-inch legroom, power outlets for his devices, a personal entertainment system with 1,500 on-demand options, But the true value of his position had emerged through the challenge to it, the opportunity to demonstrate that he belonged exactly where he was, not because of wealth or status, but because he had earned his place through legitimate means and refused to be displaced by someone else's sense of entitlement. Meanwhile, in the economy section of the aircraft, Diane Harrison sat in seething silence, the physical discomfort of the narrower 17, 3-inch seat amplifying her emotional distress. Her carefully constructed worldview, that status and privilege, naturally entitled her to preferential treatment, had been publicly challenged and dismantled. Worse, her own daughter had sided against her, creating a rift that felt both novel and threatening. Beside her, Olivia remained quiet, occasionally glancing at her phone but mostly staring straight ahead. The space between mother and daughter seemed wider than the few inches that physically separated their seats, a growing chasm of values and perspectives that the confrontation had exposed. "I don't understand why you undermined me like that," Diane finally whispered, breaking their extended silence. "We're supposed to present a united front as a family." Olivia turned to face her mother directly. "United in what, Mom? In bullying a kid out of a seat he paid for, in making up fake medical conditions, in treating someone badly because you decided he didn't belong somewhere?" The directness of these questions, coming from a daughter who had previously offered only passive resistance to her mother's behavior, shocked Diane into momentary silence. "You don't understand how the world works," she finally responded, falling back on her standard dismissal whenever her actions were questioned. "Maybe the problem is that I understand exactly how it works," Olivia replied quietly. "And I don't like it. I don't like how you treated that boy. I don't like how you act like some people matter more than others. I don't like how you think rules don't apply to us because of who Dad is or how much money we have." Each statement landed like a small revelation, not just to Diane, who had never heard her daughter speak so candidly, but to Olivia herself, who was articulating thoughts that had been building for years. "When did you become so disrespectful?" Diane asked, genuine confusion mixing with her indignation. "Is that what respect means to you? Never questioning anything you do, no matter how wrong it seems?" Olivia's voice remained low, but had gained a new certainty. Maybe real respect is being honest enough to tell someone when they're making mistakes. This philosophical reframing, challenging the very definition of respect that had governed their relationship, created another long silence between them. Diane stared straight ahead, processing the implications of her daughter's evolution from compliant child to moral critic. As the meal service reached the economy section, a simpler affair of prepackaged sandwiches and snacks, rather than the multi-course offerings in first class, both Harrison women declined, their appetites diminished by the emotional tension between them. What neither of them yet realized was that beyond their personal reckoning, a much larger conversation was unfolding online. The videos captured during the confrontation had begun their viral journey across multiple platforms, accumulating views, comments, and shares at an exponential rate driven by algorithm-determined engagement metrics. The hashtags #FirstClassKid and #CaptainJustice were trending in Chicago, then spreading regionally, with early comments ranging from outrage at Diane's behavior to admiration for Marcus's composure and Captain Ramirez's decisive intervention. Twitter's trending algorithm had identified the hashtags as having a 642% higher engagement rate than typical trending topics, while TikTok's For You page distribution had prioritized the content based on a 94.7% completion rate, significantly above the platform average. Thomas Reynolds' professional network, which included corporate ethics officers, diversity consultants, and legal professionals specializing in discrimination cases, was already analyzing the incident as a textbook example of entitlement, prejudice, and appropriate institutional response. His edited compilation of key moments, shared to his LinkedIn profile, had garnered 27,843 views within the first hour of posting, with a 37.2% engagement rate that exceeded platform benchmarks by a factor of 5. As Flight 837 continued its journey westward across Wyoming, the story it carried was simultaneously traveling through digital channels at the speed of light, amplifying what might have remained a private incident into a public conversation about privilege, dignity, and justice that would soon reach millions. In first class, blissfully unaware of his growing online fame, Marcus settled in to enjoy the amenities he had worked so hard to earn. He reclined his seat slightly, testing the smooth mechanics that allowed first-class passengers to adjust their comfort without disturbing those behind them. The premium noise-canceling headphones provided crystal-clear sound as he browsed the entertainment options, eventually selecting a documentary about aviation that he thought might give him interesting facts to share with his grandfather. Gabriella passed by occasionally, refilling his apple juice without being asked, offering a warm chocolate chip cookie freshly baked in the aircraft's galley oven, ensuring his experience lived up to his expectations. Each interaction reinforced what Marcus was beginning to understand more deeply, that true service wasn't about subservience, but about recognizing and honoring the dignity of both the server and the served. "Is there anything else you need?" Gabriella asked during one of her check-ins. "No, thank you. Everything's perfect," Marcus replied, then hesitated before adding, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, kneeling beside his seat again to maintain eye level. "Do you deal with people like that lady often? People who think they deserve special treatment?" Gabriella considered the question carefully, appreciating its maturity. "More often than I'd like to admit. In my experience, the passengers who truly belong in first class, whether because they've paid for it, earned it through loyalty, or been upgraded, rarely make a fuss about it. It's usually the people who are insecure about their status who create problems." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "My grandfather says that how you treat people who can't do anything for you shows who you really are." "Your grandfather is a wise man," Gabriella smiled. "That's a principle that applies everywhere, not just on airplanes." This simple exchange, a flight attendant treating an 11-year-old boy's philosophical question with genuine respect, exemplified the difference between service and servility, between recognizing human dignity and enforcing artificial hierarchies. As the flight continued across the American heartland, the digital spread of what had now been dubbed the first-class kid incident accelerated. Thomas Reynolds' LinkedIn post had been shared by corporate diversity officers and HR executives across multiple industries. Lisa Wong's TikTok video had surpassed 500,000 views and was being picked up by content aggregators who recognized its viral potential based on a 94.2% completion rate and a comment-to-view ratio of 187. Both metrics significantly above platform averages. Sarah Patel's Twitter thread, with its minute-by-minute account of the confrontation and aftermath, had been retweeted by several civil rights organizations and educational advocacy groups, who recognized the broader implications of the incident for discussions about implicit bias and institutional responses to discrimination. The comment sections across all platforms revealed how powerfully the story resonated with diverse audiences. "This kid showed more class than that entitled woman ever will. The captain is my new hero." That's what real leadership looks like. "I've been that black kid in spaces where people didn't think I belonged. Watching him stand his ground with dignity made me cry. As a flight attendant, I deal with this behavior daily. Nice to see consequences for once. Single mom here whose kid saves for things he wants instead of expecting handouts. So proud of this boy and his values." The incident had tapped into multiple cultural conversations simultaneously about entitlement versus earning, about racial bias and assumptions of belonging, about leadership in the face of injustice, and about the dignity of standing firm when being pressured to give up what rightfully belongs to you. As the western landscape replaced the central plains outside Marcus's window, he remained unaware that his personal journey had become symbolically meaningful to hundreds of thousands of strangers. He was simply a boy enjoying the fruits of his patient saving, mentally rehearsing how he would describe the experience to his grandfather upon landing. Thomas Reynolds, observing Marcus from across the aisle, marveled at the boy's composure throughout the entire experience. In his decades of corporate ethics work, he had witnessed countless adults crumble under far less pressure than what this child had faced with remarkable dignity. He made a mental note to follow up on his internship offer. In a few years, the corporate world needed more people with Marcus Wilson's innate moral compass and resilience. Margaret Jenkins, the retired teacher seated nearby, watched Marcus with the professional eye of someone who had evaluated character in young people for 40 years. She recognized in him qualities that couldn't be taught in conventional classrooms: persistence, dignity under pressure, the quiet confidence that came from earned achievement rather than external validation. These were the qualities that determined success far more reliably than test scores or socioeconomic advantages. "Attention passengers, We are beginning our initial descent into the San Francisco area, Captain Ramirez's voice announced over the intercom. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. As the aircraft banked gently toward its destination, Marcus felt a surge of excitement. Soon he would see his grandfather, the man whose values had shaped him, whose lessons had prepared him for this unexpected test of character, and whose pride would mean more than any luxury seat or premium service. What he didn't yet realize was that their reunion would be just the beginning of a much larger story, one that had already escaped the confines of Flight 837 to become part of a national conversation about dignity, belonging, and the true meaning of first-class character. As Flight 837 touched down at San Francisco International Airport, the gentle bump of wheels meeting runway sent a thrill of excitement through Marcus Wilson. After 20 months of saving, planning, and anticipation, he had finally arrived not just in San Francisco, but at the culmination of a journey that had tested and validated his character in ways he never expected. While the aircraft taxied toward Gate 59 at Terminal 3, Marcus's phone chimed with a series of notification sounds. Assuming they were messages from his mother checking on his safe arrival, he was surprised to find dozens of alerts from his social media account's friend requests, message notifications, and mentions in posts he didn't recognize. That's weird, he muttered, scrolling through the notifications with confusion. How did all these strangers suddenly know his name? Why were people tagging him in posts with hashtags like #FirstClassKid and #DignityWins before he could investigate further? The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their arrival at the gate and thanking passengers for flying with them. As first-class passengers were invited to disembark first, Marcus gathered his backpack and carry-on suitcase, still puzzling over the strange activity on his phone. "Marcus," Gabriella said as he prepared to exit, "it was a pleasure having you in first class today. You represented yourself and your family with remarkable dignity. Your grandfather will be very proud." "Thank you for everything," Marcus replied sincerely. "This was even better than I imagined." As he stepped into the jetway, Thomas Reynolds caught up with him. "Young man, I want to reinforce what I said earlier about contacting me in the future. People with your character are exactly who we need in positions of influence as you grow older." Marcus nodded, somewhat overwhelmed by the connection, but recognizing its significance. "Thank you, sir. I'll keep your card safe." Emerging into the terminal, Marcus scanned the waiting crowd for his grandfather. For a moment, anxiety flickered through him. What if something had happened? What if the colonel had forgotten? What if this entire journey had been for nothing? Then he spotted him, Colonel James Wilson, standing tall and straight despite his 73 years, his silver hair cropped in the same military cut he'd maintained since his Air Force days. He wasn't looking in Marcus's direction yet, his eyes fixed on the economy exit where he expected his grandson to emerge. "Grandpa," Marcus called out, waving as he approached. Colonel Wilson turned, his eyes widening with surprise as he registered his grandson emerging from the first-class jetway. For a moment, he seemed frozen in place, processing this unexpected development. Then his weathered face broke into a smile that transformed his usually stoic features. "Marcus," he said as the boy reached him, dropping his suitcase to throw his arms around his grandfather's waist. "You came first class. I saved for it," Marcus explained, his voice muffled against his grandfather's chest. "For almost 2 years, I wanted to surprise you." Colonel Wilson held his grandson at arm's length, studying the boy's face with a mixture of astonishment and growing pride. 2 years. You saved your money for 2 years to fly first class." "Yes, sir." Marcus nodded. "I remembered what you said about proving to yourself that you can achieve things others might think are beyond your reach. I wanted to show you I was listening." Something flickered in the old soldier's eyes, a powerful emotion quickly brought under military discipline. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder, the simple gesture conveying what words might have struggled to express. "Well, I'm certainly surprised," he said, his voice gruffer than usual. "And impressed by your discipline. That's no small achievement, son." As they collected Marcus's luggage and began walking toward the parking garage, Colonel Wilson noticed his grandson's phone continuing to chime with notifications. "Popular kid, aren't you?" he observed. "Your friends missing you already?" Marcus shook his head, confusion returning. "I don't know what's happening. Ever since we landed, My phone's been going crazy with messages from people I don't even know. Something about hashtags in first class. Colonel Wilson frowned slightly, his protective instincts engaged by this unusual development. Let me see. They paused by a seating area, and Marcus handed over his phone. The colonel scrolled through the notifications with increasing bewilderment. These are all about you, he said slowly. There are videos online of something that happened on your flight. Something about a woman trying to take your seat. Oh, Marcus said, suddenly understanding. There was this lady who tried to make me move from my first-class seat. She thought I didn't belong there and wanted it for her daughter. The captain had to come and tell her to go back to her own seat in economy. The simplicity of this summary belied the emotional complexity of the confrontation. But Marcus had been raised not to complain or exaggerate difficulties. Colonel Wilson, however, recognized there was more to the story. And people recorded this, he asked, a new edge in his voice. I guess so. There were a lot of phones out. The colonel opened one of the video links, and they watched together as the confrontation played out on the small screen, Diane Harrison's entitled demands, Marcus's composed responses, Captain Ramirez's decisive intervention. The clip had over 700,000 views and thousands of comments, most expressing support for Marcus and outrage at Diane's behavior. Marcus, Colonel Wilson said slowly, his expression unreadable, I need you to tell me everything that happened on that flight. Not the summary, everything. They found a quiet corner of the terminal, and Marcus recounted the full story, Diane's initial approach and assumption that he couldn't legitimately belong in first class, her escalating demands and thinly veiled prejudice, Olivia's embarrassment and eventual honesty, Captain Ramirez's investigation and clear moral stance. As the details emerged, Colonel Wilson's expression shifted between military stoicism and barely contained emotion. When Marcus described maintaining his composure by remembering his grandfather's teachings about dignity under pressure, the old man's eyes glistened momentarily before he blinked the moisture away. I see, he said when Marcus had finished. And now it seems this incident has gone viral online. Is that bad? Marcus asked, suddenly worried that he had done something wrong. No, son, not bad. Colonel Wilson placed a reassuring hand on his grandson's shoulder. But it does mean that what happened between you and that woman has become something larger, something symbolic that's resonating with a lot of people. They resumed their walk toward the parking garage, both processing the implications of this unexpected development. As they reached the colonel's meticulously maintained 2018 Ford Taurus, he turned to Marcus once more. I want you to know something. Marcus, what you did on that flight, maintaining your dignity, standing your ground without becoming angry or disrespectful, remembering the values you've been taught even under pressure, that makes me prouder than any first-class seat ever could. The simple statement, delivered with military precision rather than emotional flourish, meant everything to Marcus. This validation from the man whose opinion mattered most to him outweighed any luxury amenity or online validation. Thank you, Grandpa, he said quietly. Now, boss, Colonel Wilson continued, his practical nature reasserting itself. Let's get home and figure out how to handle this unexpected attention. Your privacy matters, and we need to think carefully about next steps. As they drove away from the airport toward the colonel's modest home in Alameda, neither could have fully appreciated how rapidly the story was continuing to spread. The videos had now been picked up by several news aggregators and social media influencers with millions of followers, transforming a personal confrontation into a national conversation about privilege, dignity, and belonging that had reached 3.8 million views across platforms. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Diane Harrison had arrived home to discover that her world was imploding. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since landing, with messages from friends, acquaintances, and colleagues, some expressing concern, others distancing themselves preemptively from the growing scandal. Richard, she called as she entered their Highland Park mansion, Olivia trailing silently behind her. Something terrible has happened. Richard Harrison emerged from his home office, his expression tense. The CFO of NextGen Investments was still wearing his work clothes despite it being Saturday, a stack of reports in his hand suggesting he'd brought work home again. I know, he said before she could launch into explanations. I've been getting calls all afternoon. The videos are everywhere. Diane, everywhere. His tone wasn't angry so much as resigned, the weariness of someone who had spent years managing his wife's excesses, now facing a situation beyond his usual damage control capabilities. It's being completely misrepresented, Diane insisted, falling into her familiar pattern of denying responsibility. I was only trying to get appropriate seating for Olivia's anxiety. That flight attendant was unhelpful, and that boy was unnecessarily difficult. The whole thing has been twisted to make me look bad. Mom, that's not what happened, Olivia said quietly but firmly from the doorway. You know that's not what happened. Richard looked between his wife and daughter, sensing the new tension between them. Olivia, why don't you go up to your room for a bit? I need to speak with your mother. Once Olivia had gone upstairs, Richard led Diane to the kitchen island, where his laptop was open to a news site featuring the headline, entitled Mom Demands Black Child Surrender First-Class Seat. Airline Captain's Response Goes Viral. This is bad, Diane, he said without preamble. Really bad. I've had 3 board members call me personally. The company's PR department has been in crisis mode all afternoon. Your full name is out there, which means NextGen is being associated with this behavior. It's ridiculous, Diane protested, though with less conviction than before. Everyone's overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Richard rubbed his temples, the gesture of a man who had reached his limit. A misunderstanding. There are multiple videos, Diane. I've watched them. The things you said, the way you treated that child. It's indefensible. You told him he didn't belong in first class. You implied he couldn't have legitimately purchased his ticket. You made up a medical condition for Olivia to try to justify taking his seat. The clinical assessment of her behavior, delivered without his usual cushioning, left Diane momentarily speechless. The board is meeting Monday morning to discuss the situation, Richard continued. They're concerned about reputational damage to the company. My position could be at risk. This concrete consequence, the potential threat to their family's financial standing, penetrated Diane's defensive shield in a way that moral objections never had. Surely they can't hold you responsible for something I did on a personal trip, she asked, alarm replacing indignation. That's exactly what they can and will do. Richard replied, my judgment is being questioned. If I can't control my family's behavior, how can I be trusted to manage the company's finances? That's the conversation happening right now in board text threads. As the implications sank in, Diane's phone chimed with another notification. She glanced down to see a message from Carla Whitman, chair of the Highland Park Community Foundation. Emergency board meeting called to discuss your continued role as events coordinator, given recent developments. Please call me ASAP. The foundation position, largely ceremonial but critically important to Diane's social standing, was now also in jeopardy. The carefully constructed edifice of privilege and status that she had spent decades building was showing cracks from multiple directions. What do we do? She asked, her voice smaller than Richard had ever heard it. I don't know yet, he admitted. The PR team is working on a strategy. They've suggested you make a public apology, but given the nature of the incident, they're concerned it might come across as insincere or forced. Apologize, Diane repeated, as if the concept were foreign. To that boy. Richard looked at his wife directly, a new firmness in his gaze. Yes, Diane. To Marcus Wilson. That's his name, by the way. He's 11 years old and saved for 2 years to buy that first-class ticket to visit his grandfather in San Francisco. Our research team found that out while trying to assess the full scope of the situation. The humanizing details the boy's name, his age. The purpose of his journey landed differently than abstract discussions about viral videos and PR strategies. For perhaps the first time, Diane was forced to see Marcus as a complete person rather than merely an obstacle to her desires. Upstairs, Olivia sat on her bed staring at her own phone, watching the online reaction unfold in real time. The comments about her mother were harsh, but she had to admit, not entirely unfair. What surprised her were the comments about herself. Many people had noticed her discomfort, her attempt to get her mother to stop, her eventual honesty with the captain. The daughter seemed so embarrassed. Poor kid. At least the teenager has a conscience. Even if her mom doesn't, the mom's behavior makes more sense when you see how the daughter tried to stand up to her. That girl has probably been dealing with this her whole life. These observations from strangers felt like validation of feelings she had suppressed for years, the discomfort with her mother's entitlement, the embarrassment at her treatment of service workers. The growing awareness that wealth and status didn't justify mistreating others. In a moment of decision, Olivia opened her private Twitter account and began composing a message. She wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, but she felt compelled to add her voice to the conversation about her own family. I'm Olivia Harrison, the daughter from the first-class kid incident that's going viral. That was my mom on the plane. I'm 14 years old and I was embarrassed and ashamed of how she acted. Marcus didn't deserve any of that treatment. He was polite, respectful, and showed more maturity than my mother did. I've learned that being related to someone doesn't mean you have to agree with their actions. What my mom did was wrong, and I hope this serves as a lesson that entitlement and prejudice are never okay, no matter who you are or how much money you have. Her finger hovered over the post button, a lifetime of conditional love and family loyalty battling against her emerging moral compass. After a moment of hesitation, she pressed tweet, sending her perspective into the digital conversation that was already reshaping her family's reality. As night fell on both coasts, Marcus Wilson and Diane Harrison found themselves at opposite ends of a story that had escaped their control to become something larger, a parable about entitlement versus earning, about prejudice versus dignity, about the true meaning of belonging in spaces of privilege. Neither could have anticipated how this chance encounter at 35,000 feet would continue to reverberate through their lives in the days and weeks to come. 1 week after Flight 837 landed, the ripple effects of what media outlets had dubbed the first-class confrontation continued to expand in unexpected directions. The original videos had collectively amassed over 50 million views across various platforms, spawning thousands of reaction videos, commentary pieces, and social media discussions that generated an estimated $427,000 in advertising revenue for content creators and platforms. In Alameda, California, Marcus Wilson and his grandfather sat at the kitchen table of the Colonel's modest home, reviewing the latest developments with a mixture of amazement and concern. 3 major morning shows had requested interviews. 2 children's advocacy organizations had reached out about potential speaking engagements, and a prestigious private school in the Bay Area had discreetly inquired about scholarship opportunities for the fall semester. It's overwhelming, Marcus admitted, staring at the growing list of requests. I didn't do anything special. I just stood up for myself the way you taught me. Colonel Wilson considered his grandson thoughtfully. At 73, James Wilson had witnessed enough of life's complexity to recognize significant moments when they appeared. This was one such moment, a potential turning point in his grandson's development that required careful navigation. Sometimes, Marcus, our private actions take on public meaning beyond our intentions, he explained. What happened on that flight has resonated with people because it represents something larger than just one confrontation. Like what? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the outsized reaction to what had seemed, from his perspective, a personal challenge rather than a symbolic event. Like the dignity of standing your ground when someone tries to make you feel you don't belong. Like the importance of earning what you have rather than expecting it to be given to you. Like the courage it takes to maintain your composure when facing intimidation. The Colonel paused, then added, these are values that many people recognize as important, but don't often see demonstrated so clearly, especially by someone your age. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand the broader context of the incident. So what should we do about all these requests? Colonel Wilson had given this considerable thought over the past week. We need to be strategic. You're 11 years old, your privacy and education come first. But there may be opportunities here to reinforce the positive values this situation has highlighted, without exploiting you or turning this into a circus. Together, they crafted a measured response plan. Marcus would accept one carefully selected interview with a respected journalist known for thoughtful coverage of social issues. He would decline commercial opportunities or endorsements that might monetize the incident. The Colonel would help him compose a single public statement that emphasized the values of dignity, hard work, and respectful treatment of others. Remember, Colonel Wilson advised, this isn't about villainizing that woman or positioning yourself as some kind of hero. It's about reinforcing the principles that matter, then returning to your normal life as a student and a young man with his own private journey ahead. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the Harrison family was experiencing the aftermath very differently. Richard Harrison sat in an emergency board meeting at NextGen Investments, facing the stern expressions of fellow executives as they discussed the PR crisis engulfing the company. The association with Harrison's behavior has already impacted our stock price, reported Alicia Mendez, head of investor relations. We've seen a 4.7% drop since markets opened Monday, representing approximately $237 million in market capitalization loss. 3 institutional investors managing combined assets of $8.4 billion have expressed concerns about company culture and values. Social sentiment analysis shows overwhelmingly negative reactions to the NextGen brand when mentioned in connection with the incident, added marketing director Jason Park. Our AI-powered brand monitoring system has identified terms like entitled, privileged, and discriminatory appearing in 87% of social media mentions, with a negative sentiment score of 8.7 out of 10. Richard sat straighter, summoning the financial expertise that had built his career. I understand the severity of the situation. My wife's behavior was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for the reputational damage to NextGen. I've prepared a 3-point remediation plan for the board's consideration. He outlined a comprehensive strategy, a substantial personal donation of $750,000 to educational equity organizations, mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all NextGen executives, including himself, contracted through Thomas Reynolds' consulting firm, ironically, and a company-wide initiative to evaluate internal culture and hiring practices to ensure they reflected genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion. Additionally, Richard concluded, Diane has agreed to step back from all public-facing roles associated with NextGen and to undertake personal counseling to address the underlying issues her behavior revealed. The board members exchanged glances, weighing the political and financial calculus of the situation. After decades of corporate success, Richard Harrison's position hung in the balance over a family incident that had exploded beyond anyone's control. We'll need to discuss this in executive session, the board chair finally announced. Richard, thank you for your candor and proposed actions. Please understand that our decision must prioritize the company's long-term interests and values. As Richard left the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a message from home. Olivia not speaking to Diane. Tension unbearable. Please come home ASAP. Angela housekeeper. The personal cost of the incident was proving as significant as the professional consequences. Back at their Highland Park mansion, Diane Harrison was experiencing a form of social isolation entirely new to her privileged existence. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with the invitations and social coordination, had gone eerily silent. 3 charity boards had requested her temporary withdrawal pending review. The country club committee had sent a carefully worded email about upholding community standards. Longtime social acquaintances suddenly had scheduling conflicts when she suggested lunch. Most painful was the continuing rift with Olivia, whose Twitter statement had gone viral in its own right, praised for its maturity and moral clarity with 287,000 retweets and 1.2 million likes. Mother and daughter moved through the large house like strangers, Olivia's quiet but firm moral stance creating a gulf that Diane's usual tactics of manipulation, bribery, or dismissal couldn't bridge. When Richard arrived home that evening, he found Diane sitting alone in their palatial living room, an untouched glass of wine on the table beside her. The board is still deliberating, he reported wearily, loosening his tie. But I think my position is salvageable if we follow through on the remediation plan we discussed. Is that all you care about your job? Diane asked, a defensive edge in her voice. Richard took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he had been avoiding for years. No, Diane, what I care about is that this situation that has forced me to confront patterns I've been enabling for far too long. Our privilege has become a shield from consequences, and that's not healthy for any of us, especially Olivia. So this is my fault. I'm the villain in all this. Diane's voice rose with indignation. This isn't about villains, Richard replied firmly. It's about recognizing that wealth and status don't exempt us from basic human decency. That boy on the plane, Marcus, he saved for 2 years to buy that first-class ticket. 2 years. Diane, he earned his seat in a way that we, frankly, rarely have to earn anything. The blunt assessment landed heavily in the expansive living room. For the first time, Richard wasn't softening reality to placate his wife's fragile sense of superiority. The crisis had forced a reckoning that had been building for years beneath the surface of their privileged existence. On the corporate front, the airline's response to the incident was evolving into a case study in crisis management and ethical leadership. Initially concerned about potential litigation or negative publicity, they had quickly recognized an opportunity to reinforce positive values when public sentiment overwhelmingly supported Marcus and Captain Ramirez. The airline's CEO had issued a statement commending Captain Ramirez's exemplary leadership in upholding our core values of dignity and respect for all passengers. A new training module was being developed for flight crews, using the incident as a teaching example of appropriate intervention in discriminatory situations. Captain Ramirez had been invited to help design the training, bringing his military experience and moral clarity to the corporate learning environment. Flight attendant Gabriela Ramirez received a formal commendation and was promoted to lead a new initiative on conflict de-escalation and bias recognition. Her professional handling of the confrontation was being highlighted as an example of maintaining service standards while establishing clear boundaries around unacceptable behavior. The incident had created unexpected connections as well. Thomas Reynolds, the corporate ethics consultant who had witnessed the confrontation, contacted Colonel Wilson to formalize his offer of future mentorship for Marcus. Margaret Jenkins, the retired teacher who had supported Marcus during the flight, established a small scholarship at her former Chicago school called the First Class Character Award to recognize students who demonstrated dignity and persistence in challenging circumstances. Even Olivia Harrison found herself forging new paths in the aftermath. Her Twitter statement had resonated with other teenagers from privileged backgrounds who struggled with family values that didn't align with their evolving social consciousness. She began corresponding with several of them, finding community in their shared experiences and determination to chart different courses than their parents. One evening, she received a private message that startled her with its directness. "Hi, Olivia. This is Marcus Wilson. I just wanted to say I thought your Twitter post was really brave. It can't be easy to speak up when it's your own family involved. Thank you." The simple acknowledgement from the friend at the center of the storm touched Olivia deeply. After careful consideration, she replied, "Thank you for saying that. I'm really sorry for how my mom treated you on the plane. Your composure made me realize I need to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Their brief exchange represented something profound, two young people from vastly different circumstances finding common ground in their commitment to character over status, to earned respect over entitled demands. As the immediate viral nature of the incident began to subside, deeper conversations emerged in educational settings, corporate training programs, and media analysis. What had begun as a confrontation over an airplane seat had evolved into a multifaceted discussion about privilege, dignity, earned achievement, and institutional responses to discriminatory behavior. The hashtag first class character emerged as a shorthand for conducting oneself with dignity regardless of external circumstances, a concept that resonated across demographic and political divisions in a way that few viral moments achieved. According to social media analytics firm SocialTrack, the hashtag had been used in 1.7 million posts with a 72% positive sentiment rating, significantly higher than most trending topics related to social issues. For Marcus Wilson, returning to normal life in Chicago after his visit with his grandfather brought new awareness of his own resilience and capacity to stand firm in challenging situations. The experience hadn't fundamentally changed him. The qualities that had allowed him to maintain his composure had been there all along, cultivated through his grandfather's guidance and his own determination. What had changed was his understanding of how those qualities might serve him in the future, and the network of supporters who had recognized his potential through this unexpected moment in the spotlight. Thomas Reynolds had already connected him with an educational mentor. Captain Ramirez had sent a handwritten note of encouragement. Several of his classmates looked at him with new respect after seeing the viral videos. For Diane Harrison, the road ahead was less clear but potentially more transformative. The public humiliation and tangible consequences had created cracks in her carefully constructed worldview, opportunities for growth if she could overcome her defensive resistance to self-examination. Richard had scheduled their first session with a therapist specializing in privilege awareness and personal development. Olivia had agreed to participate in family counseling, though she maintained her moral boundaries with quiet determination. The external facade of perfection had crumbled, revealing the possibility of building something more authentic in its place. As the ripples from Flight 837 continued to spread through individual lives, corporate policies, and social discourse. The fundamental questions it had raised remained potent. Who truly belongs in spaces of privilege? What does earned achievement look like versus entitled expectation? How do institutions respond to discriminatory behavior? And perhaps most importantly, what does real first-class character look like when tested under pressure? 6 months after the incident on Flight 837, Marcus Wilson stood nervously at a podium in the Chicago Public Library's main auditorium. At 12 years old now, his birthday had passed. The previous month, he still found public speaking intimidating, despite the confidence he had shown during the confrontation that had unexpectedly thrust him into the spotlight. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm really excited to announce the official launch of the First Class Character Scholarship Fund." The audience, a diverse gathering of educators, business leaders, community advocates, and fellow students, applauded encouragingly. In the front row, his mother, Patricia, beamed with pride. Seated beside Colonel Wilson, who had flown in from San Francisco for the occasion, Thomas Reynolds, who had helped structure the nonprofit foundation, nodded approvingly from his seat on the stage. "When that incident happened on the plane 6 months ago, I never expected it would lead to something like this," Marcus continued. "I was just trying to stand up for myself the way my grandfather taught me. But sometimes small moments can turn into bigger opportunities if we're ready for them." The scholarship fund had begun almost accidentally. After Marcus and Colonel Wilson had declined commercial endorsements or paid interviews, people had started sending unsolicited donations, small amounts from ordinary citizens who had been moved by the viral story and wanted to support the values it represented. Rather than accept this money personally, Marcus had suggested creating a scholarship to help other young people from modest backgrounds who demonstrated the same qualities of persistence, dignity, and earned achievement that he had embodied on that flight. Thomas Reynolds had provided pro bono legal assistance to establish the foundation properly. Several corporations, including the airline involved in the original incident, had contributed matching funds. What had started with a few $100s in spontaneous donations had grown to over $175,000, enough to fund several significant scholarships for deserving students. The First Class Character Scholarship isn't about flying in first class, Marcus explained to the audience. It's about showing first-class character even when facing challenges. It's for students who work hard, treat others with respect, and stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. He outlined the criteria: academic effort, not necessarily perfect grades, but demonstrated commitment to learning, financial need, community service, and a personal essay about overcoming obstacles with dignity. The first scholarships would be awarded to 5 Chicago middle school students transitioning to high school, providing financial support, mentorship, and educational enrichment opportunities. We're especially focusing on helping students who might be the first in their families to attend college someday, like I hope to be, Marcus added, glancing at his mother, whose night shift nursing work had inspired his own appreciation for healthcare as a potential career path. As he concluded his remarks and introduced the Foundation's advisory board, an impressive collection of educators, business leaders, and community advocates who had volunteered their expertise, Marcus felt a sense of purpose that transcended his original goal of simply flying first class to visit his grandfather. The scholarship fund represented something more meaningful: the transformation of a moment of conflict into a lasting legacy of opportunity for others. By declining to monetize his viral fame for personal gain and instead channeling public support toward educational access, Marcus had demonstrated the very values the foundation sought to reward. After the formal presentation, during the reception that followed, Marcus found himself approached by an unexpected guest, Olivia Harrison, who had attended the event without her parents. "Hi," she said somewhat awkwardly, having only communicated with Marcus through brief social media exchanges until now. "I hope it's okay that I came. I saw the announcement online and wanted to support what you're doing." "Of course it's okay," Marcus replied, genuinely pleased to see her. "How have you been?" "It's been complicated," Olivia admitted. "But good. I think my parents are in therapy separately and together. My mom is actually making some progress. Believe it or not, she's doing community service at a homeless shelter in Englewood, which was definitely not in her 5-year plan." They both smiled at this understatement, sharing the unspoken understanding of exactly how dramatic this change represented for Diane Harrison. "I wanted to tell you," Olivia continued, That watching you that day on the plane, how you stood up for yourself with such dignity, it helped me find my own voice. I started a diversity alliance at my school. We're working on raising awareness about privilege and inclusion. It's small, but it feels important. Marcus nodded, recognizing the courage this had required in Olivia's Highland Park social environment, where the median household income of $211,250 created a bubble of privilege that few residents voluntarily examined. That doesn't sound small at all. That sounds really important. Anyway, Olivia said, reaching into her bag, I wanted to contribute to your scholarship fund. She handed him an envelope. It's not a lot, just my allowance for the past 6 months, but it felt like the right thing to do with it. The gesture, this child of extreme privilege voluntarily redirecting her financial resources toward creating opportunities for others, represented its own form of growth and transformation. Thank you, Marcus said simply, accepting the envelope with appreciation for what it symbolized beyond its monetary value. Every contribution matters, especially when it comes from someone's personal choice. As they continued talking, finding unexpected common ground despite their different backgrounds, Colonel Wilson observed them from across the room with satisfaction. Two young people forging their own value systems, learning from a challenging experience rather than being defined by it. This was the kind of outcome he had hoped might emerge from the difficult situation on Flight 837. Across town, in the corporate headquarters of NextGen Investments, Richard Harrison was having a very different kind of meeting. 6 months of personal reckoning, professional consequences, and family therapy had transformed his approach to both business and personal accountability. The Diversity and Inclusion Initiative quarterly results show significant progress, reported Dr. Renee E. Johnson, the consultant who had been hired to help reshape NextGen's corporate culture. Hiring practices have become more equitable, with a 47% increase in diverse candidates advancing to final interview rounds. Retention rates for employees of color have improved by 32%, and our supplier diversity program has exceeded initial targets by 28.3%. Richard nodded, noting the concrete metrics with approval. Following the viral incident involving his wife, his position as CFO had been maintained, but with probationary conditions including his personal leadership of the company's diversity transformation efforts. What had begun as a reputation-saving necessity had evolved into a genuine commitment as he recognized the business benefits of a more inclusive approach. And the mentorship program, he asked, referring to an initiative he had personally championed, exceeding expectations. Dr. Johnson confirmed, the pairing of senior executives with employees from underrepresented groups has created pathways for advancement that simply didn't exist before. We're seeing promising improvements in promotion rates and leadership development metrics, with a 37.8% increase in diverse employees receiving high potential designations. For Richard, these changes represented more than corporate strategy. They reflected his evolving personal values. The public humiliation of the airplane incident and its aftermath had forced him to examine his own complicity in systems of privilege that he had previously taken for granted. Rather than simply managing the PR crisis, he had chosen to engage in genuine transformation, both professionally and personally. There's one more item I'd like to discuss, he said as the meeting concluded. I've been following the first-class character scholarship launched by Marcus Wilson, the young man from the airplane incident. I'd like to propose that NextGen establish a matching fund for their educational initiatives, with no publicity requirements or corporate branding attached. The suggestion, generous support without the expectation of PR benefits, demonstrated how far Richard's thinking had evolved from the immediate damage control of 6 months earlier. That sounds like an excellent idea, Dr. Pierre Johnson agreed. It aligns perfectly with our commitment to creating educational pathways for underrepresented youth. As Richard walked back to his office afterward, he reflected on the complex journey the past 6 months had represented. His marriage was still in recovery, with Diane making uneven but sincere efforts to address the entitlement issues that had been exposed so publicly. His relationship with Olivia had actually strengthened as they found common ground and values that transcended their privileged lifestyle. The Harrison family would never be the same after Flight 837, but increasingly, Richard was recognizing that this disruption had created space for something potentially healthier to emerge from the wreckage of their former facade. Back at the scholarship launch event, Marcus was speaking with Captain Michael Ramirez, who had become an unexpected mentor following the incident. The captain had taken a special interest in Marcus's development, recognizing in the boy qualities that reminded him of his own journey from modest beginnings to positions of responsibility. The airline's training program has been completely revamped, Captain Ramirez explained. We're using the incident as a case study in appropriate intervention when discriminatory situations arise. Your experience has literally changed how thousands of flight crew members are being trained to handle similar conflicts. Marcus seems slightly overwhelmed by this information. I still can't believe something that happened to me is being used to train people. That's how progress happens sometimes, Captain Ramirez replied. Individual experiences, when properly understood, can lead to systemic improvements. Your dignity under pressure created a teaching moment that's helping an entire industry do better. The captain had received his own recognition following the incident. His clear, principled response had been featured in leadership seminars beyond the aviation industry. He had been promoted to a training oversight role that allowed him to shape the airline's approach to conflict resolution and passenger dignity across its entire operation. I'm considering becoming a pilot someday, Marcus confided. My grandfather was Air Force, and I've always loved flying. After everything that's happened, it seems even more interesting as a possible career. The industry would be lucky to have someone with your character, Captain Ramirez responded sincerely. If that's a path you decide to pursue, I'd be honored to help guide you through the process when the time comes. This offer of mentorship, creating a potential pathway from a difficult moment to a future career, exemplified how the incident had generated unexpected opportunities and connections that transcended the original conflict. As evening approached and the scholarship launch event wound down, Colonel Wilson and Marcus shared a quiet moment together, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. Your grandmother would be so proud of you today, the colonel said, rare emotion evident in his voice. Not just for standing up for yourself on that flight, but for what you've chosen to do with the attention that came afterward. Creating opportunities for others instead of benefits for yourself, that's true character. I learned it from you, Grandpa. Marcus replied simply. You know, the colonel continued, when I was in the Air Force, I faced situations similar to what you experienced on that flight. People who didn't think I belonged in the officer corps, who thought my presence was some kind of mistake or special accommodation rather than something I'd earned through merit and hard work. What did you do? Marcus asked, having heard some but not all of his grandfather's experiences with discrimination during his military career. Much the same as you did, Colonel Wilson answered with a small smile. I maintained my dignity, performed my duties with excellence, and let my actions speak louder than their prejudice. And gradually, most of them came around when they saw that competence has no color. This sharing of intergenerational wisdom, the continuation of lessons that had prepared Marcus for his moment of testing, represented the true foundation of his composure during the confrontation. The values that had allowed him to maintain dignity under pressure hadn't emerged from nowhere. They had been carefully cultivated through his grandfather's mentorship and example. The best response to people who think you don't belong somewhere, the colonel concluded, is to prove through your character and conduct that you belong anywhere your abilities and efforts have legitimately taken you. As they prepared to leave the event, Marcus took one final look around the auditorium where his scholarship fund had been officially launched. What had begun as a personal goal saving for a first-class ticket to surprise his grandfather had evolved into something with far greater significance. The incident on Flight 837 could have remained simply an unpleasant memory, a moment of confrontation that faded with time. Instead, through the choices made by everyone involved, it had been transformed into a catalyst for growth, change, and opportunity not just for Marcus, but for the many lives touched by the ripple effects of that pivotal moment. 6 months had turned an airplane seat dispute into a scholarship fund, a corporate diversity initiative, an airline training program, mentorship opportunities, and personal transformations that continued to unfold in ways no one could have predicted when Flight 837 departed Chicago that day, and the journey for all of them was just beginning. 3 years later, on a clear spring morning, 14-year-old Marcus Wilson stood on the tarmac of a small municipal airport outside Chicago, his heart pounding with excitement. Clipped to his shirt was a student pilot logbook, still mostly empty except for today's scheduled first solo flight lesson. In his pocket, carried as a talisman, were his grandfather's Air Force wings given to him on his 14th birthday with the simple instruction to soar with dignity. "Ready for today's lesson?" asked his flight instructor, Sarah Rodriguez, Captain Ramirez's niece who had volunteered to teach Marcus through a special program for aspiring young pilots from underrepresented backgrounds. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, performing the pre-flight inspection with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized everything he did. His growth spurt over the past year had added 6 inches to his height, but his careful, thoughtful demeanor remained unchanged. So much had changed in the 3 years since Flight 837. The first-class character scholarship fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations, now supporting 27 students across Chicago with educational enrichment, mentorship, and financial assistance totaling $1.2 million in distributed aid. 5 of the original scholarship recipients were now preparing for college applications, their academic trajectories forever altered by the opportunities the fund had provided. The incident that had sparked this transformation had long since faded from viral headlines, but its impact continued to ripple through individual lives, corporate policies, and educational institutions. The airline's training program, developed in response to the confrontation, had become an industry standard, adopted by carriers worldwide as a model for addressing discriminatory situations and upholding passenger dignity. Captain Ramirez had been promoted to Director of Flight Operations, where his emphasis on ethical leadership had influenced a generation of pilots and reduced passenger-related incidents by 47.3% across the airline's network. Flight attendant Gabriela Ramirez had risen to Senior Training Coordinator, specializing in conflict, de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. Their approach to the incident had become a case study in professional ethics courses at several universities. Thomas Reynolds had established a corporate ethics consultancy that specialized in helping companies translate diversity commitments into meaningful action, with next-gen investments among his first clients. Margaret Jenkins's first-class character award had spread from her former Chicago school to a citywide program recognizing students who demonstrated dignity and persistence in challenging circumstances. For the Harrison family, the journey had been more complex but ultimately transformative. Richard Harrison had experienced a profound shift in priorities, eventually leaving NextGen to establish a foundation focused on educational equity and economic opportunity in underserved communities. The corporate values he had once espoused primarily for public relations purposes had become genuine personal commitments. Diane Harrison's path had been the most difficult but perhaps most remarkable. After initial resistance and resentment, she had gradually engaged in the painful work of examining her entitlement, prejudice, and insecurity. 3 years of therapy, community service, and uncomfortable growth had transformed her from someone who demanded deference based on status to someone learning to earn respect through character and conduct. Olivia, now 17, had emerged as a poised young leader at her high school, establishing mentorship programs between Highland Park students and peers from Chicago's South and West Sides. Her early stand against her mother's behavior had evolved into a committed advocacy for bridging social divisions that her privileged upbringing had previously allowed her to ignore. The occasional communication between Marcus and Olivia had developed into an unexpected friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Despite their different backgrounds and experiences, they recognized in each other a common commitment to dignity, fairness, and earned achievement rather than entitled expectation. As Marcus completed his pre-flight checklist and prepared for his lesson, he reflected on how that confrontation on Flight 837 had shaped his understanding of himself and his place in the world. The incident hadn't given him confidence or character. Those qualities had been there already, cultivated through his grandfather's wisdom and his own experiences. What it had given him was confirmation that those qualities mattered, that standing firm in dignity could have consequences beyond the immediate moment. The airplane seat that had symbolized his persistence and determination had become something much larger, a platform from which his character could be witnessed and acknowledged, a catalyst for opportunities and connections that continued to shape his path. As he settled into the cockpit with his instructor, preparing for the lesson that represented another step toward his dreams of flight, Marcus thought about his grandfather's words during their last phone call. "Remember, the greatest altitude you'll ever achieve isn't measured in feet above ground, but in the depth of your character and the height of your aspirations." The legacy of Flight 837 lived on, not just in viral videos or training programs, but in the daily choices of everyone involved to recognize dignity regardless of status. to earn achievement rather than expect entitlement, to stand firm in the face of intimidation without losing composure. For Marcus Wilson, preparing to pilot an aircraft for the first time under his instructor's watchful eye, the journey that had begun with saving for a first-class ticket had evolved into something far more meaningful, a life guided by first-class character. Regardless of where he was sitting, if this story of dignity, perseverance, and standing up for what's right resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories of ordinary people showing extraordinary character in challenging moments. Have you ever witnessed someone standing their ground with dignity when others tried to make them feel they didn't belong? Or have you been in Marcus's position yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire others facing similar situations. Remember, true first class has nothing to do with where you sit. It's about how you carry yourself, especially when tested. Subscribe now for more stories that celebrate dignity, courage, and the power of doing what's right.